welcome back. So this is episode 2 of your new favourite film podcast, Kino Inferno, or at least I'd hope it's your new favourite. My name is Mark, and I'm joined by my lovely co-host, Aidan and Marc.
Hello, I am Aidan. I have a last name, but Mark doesn't apparently.
Yep, I'm going to make sure people can find you online instead of me.
Yes, direct the hate at me.
yeah, if you have any fan mail or complaints, you give it to Aidan.
He's Mark from what country?
Stop telling people. I'll get in trouble.
Let's call him out. Call him out.
Stop it.
I'll leave that in.
You're such a dick. Anyway, so yeah, this is episode 2 of the podcast. I already want to kill Aidan. But we're here today, as you can see from the title, which is somewhere. I'm pointing. We're not even on a fucking screen. So this is the new Giallo is what we're going to be talking about today.
Giallo.
Yes, Giallo, or which I feel like maybe some people listening might not be overly familiar with.
And if you're not, then you're obviously not a serious cinephile, so you might as well fuck off. So I'm being very adversarial today. We had a laid back first episode, so I'm feeling like we should have a bit more of a punky feel to episode 2.
A little bit edgy. All right. Well, I mean, looking at our film choices, I can say we're definitely being a little bit edgier today. I feel like me saying your surname at the start really kind of got you there. I feel like I've riled you up.
I'm riled. I'm ready to go. But no, we should probably explain a little bit about what we mean by Giallo.
Is that how we've got to say it for the rest of the episode now?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Okay. I'll try my best. I don't think I can do the accent as well as you. Giallo. Yeah, I can
Giallo.
Continue. I hate it already, but go on.
Yeah, so essentially what is meant by Giallo is a kind of sort of a movement that's mostly from the 60s and 70s, right, in Italy, of kind of mystery horror films. They sort of paved the way for what we would know as slasher films today, I suppose.
Essentially, yeah.
But they tend to be more kind of focused on mystery and kind of... they're sort of very, very sexualized and violent and stylized murder mysteries for the most part.
Yeah, essentially. So, from what I know, the actual term giallo comes from the novel. They're like a series of like pulp novels, and giallo is Italian for yellow, and these books often came with yellow titles, hence where the name comes from. But they were like overly violent and smutty sort of murder mysteries, and there's a lot of... Because a lot of people would just look at them and think they're murder mysteries or they're slashers or whatever. But like the things with like Giallo movies, I'm not doing the accent anymore. I can't be asked.
Giallo.
I'll tell you what, right? You can edit that in. Every time I'm supposed to say Giallo, I want you to replace it.
I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot of work. I'm not doing that.
It is. Okay. Right. So... Yeah, a lot of people would sort of attribute them as being kind of like basic murder mysteries and stuff. But there's a lot of sort of tropes and a lot of story ideas that you see a lot throughout Giallo films. One of the main things being that the investigation is pretty much never led by the police.
In fact, the police are mostly useless in Giallo films. That's a real trope.
Yeah, it's like a huge thing is where it's actually like the protagonist who always tends to have a job like they're a photographer or they work in fashion or they're a medium or they always have like some completely pointless job that has no bearing on the actual narrative.
So I'm just laughing at the 3 main careers there. A photographer, fashion person and medium.
I'm like...
Those are the 3 main career paths.
I was just going through my head of like what my favourite Giallo movies are.
No, there's a lot of mediums in Giallo.
Yeah,
like a lot of psychics.
Yeah, exactly. Like Deep Red. Dario Argento's Deep Red is
Sorry, I think you mean Profondo Rosso.
Profondo Rosso, yeah. I prefer.
This is probably offensive.
Probably. We'll find out. Profondo Rosso, yeah, or Deep Red as it's known. Actually, I prefer its American title because it's called Dripping Deep Red, and maybe it's just because I like the word dripping. I don't know, but I think
he loves dripping.
I do. I just think Dripping Deep Red is a good name for a horror film. Anyway, we got sidetracked by your vaguely offensive accent.
Profondo Rosso.
Stop.
Okay.
So Giallo movies, they're not really a thing anymore. They very much died out in the 70s. And it's a shame because they're really, really good. And for the most part, some of them are absolute toss.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of them are not good.
Yeah. But yeah, so both me and you, we're both, quite big fans of like Italian horror and big fans of Giallo as well. So these two films that we're talking about today kind of came as a no-brainer, really. And I think that one of the main things that we can sort of say about these films before we actually get into talking about them is that even though Giallo is a genre that's not really around anymore, for a lot of people, particularly even like people that like horror films, I find that like Italian horror and Giallo can actually be quite hard to get into.
Yeah, I know I don't... I think you're more versed in Giallo than I am. I definitely have the ones that I like and think are pretty good, but yeah, there's a lot of Giallo that is kind of slightly impenetrable, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I think so. If you take some of the kind of established masters of Giallo, like Dario Argento, his movies to me, I know you're a big fan. A lot of them are they're very visually impressive, but narratively don't have a lot going on, or are just kind of incoherent. I'm a big fan of Profondo Rosso and Suspiria.
Suspiria's the interesting one, though. That's the interesting one, because so many people go back and forth forever on whether or not Suspiria is actually a Giallo movie. I'd just be actually interested to know what you say.
I think in every conceivable way, it represents what the kind of mainstream appreciation of what like a Giallo experience would be. Like, you have the exact experience with that you would expect to have with a Giallo film. So I think in that regard, it is a Giallo film.
Yeah, I'm of the same opinion. I think Suspiria is definitely a Giallo movie, but the main reason why I think a lot of people don't attribute it as being one is because the plot is supernatural, whereas Giallo movies tend to be about people in fedoras and black gloves murdering scantily clad women. That tends to just be the standard of the genre, really. But no, they can be quite hard to get into, and as you say, so like, you know, you quite like the ones like Deep Red or Profondo Rosso, if I'm going to use its Italian title, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, I know you're a big Argento fan. Argento is one of those guys who I don't have a great deal of affection for. Like, I like his works that I've seen for the most part. But it's always that kind of tempered appreciation where I'm a bit like, I sort of get what is good about this, but it doesn't do a lot for me, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I completely get what you mean. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Dario Argento, but I will be the first to admit that not every film he's made is great, and even some of the ones of his that I really like perhaps aren't, you know, particularly well-regarded films. But as much as I'm a fan of him, I do have to be in the mood to watch an Argento film. Aside from Suspiria, I could literally bang Suspiria on at any point and watch that, because it's, you know, top 5 favourite films ever for me.
Yeah, no, Suspiria is fantastic. But in terms of Giallo directors, or directors who have made Giallo films, I'm definitely more... again, I suppose he's not made many films that would be technically considered Giallo by absolute purists, but I am more of a fan of Mario Bava.
Yeah, I've always kind of known that more about you, is that you kind of go more towards Bava. But like in terms of like Giallo, I mean, he made Blood and Black Lace. Yes,
which to me is the kind of epitome of the Giallo style. It's kind of got everything you want in that, really.
I rewatched that last October, and it's kind of amazing how many elements from Blood and Black Lace you still see used in like modern horror movies.
Yeah, no, it's a really influential piece. He also did some other Giallo type stuff. He did 5 Dolls for an August Moon.
Yeah, which I've never seen, actually. It's one of those things where, as much as I'm kind of really into the Italian horror stuff, like there's still so much of it that I've never seen.
Yeah, well, it's one of those periods, kind of. I was going to say almost like the new French Extreme, but that was nowhere near as productive as the Giallo period was in Italy, I don't think. But it was like, well, actually, the only thing I can really compare it to is like the spaghetti western boom of the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
Which was, you know, a lot of the same people involved with it, really, as well. So,
yeah, well, Giallos, and they were big business. Like, they really were. And they, you know, a lot of those films, like Dario Argento's movies, they're all huge, like, box office successes. That's why he had such a prolific run in the 70s, because each of his films just were, you know, did massively well, and then some of them did really well in the States as well.
Yes, but today we're not talking about the old style Giallo. We're talking about two new films which are somewhat influenced by the Giallo genre, are homaging it.
I think somewhat is a bit of an understatement, but...
yeah. I mean, well, we'll get into it then, shall we?
Yeah, so there's no better time. So we've given you a brief overview of Giallo as best we can.
Yes.
One
thing we definitely forgot to say, like the professional podcasters we are, is, because this would be relevant to both films, leather gloves turn up in Giallo films a lot.
Yeah, I think I may have briefly mentioned that earlier. It's all about killers in black gloves. Just all about killers in black gloves.
Just remember that, because we'll definitely bring it up when we're discussing the films. So I just want to seed that in. Smoothly, seamlessly.
Also, like, just before we go to, like, because you mentioned the black gloves thing, one thing that I had to say is that Dario Argento was infamous for, in his movies, whenever you see the killer's gloved hands murdering somebody, it was 9 times out of 10 it was always Argento.
Yes.
Like himself doing it. And I just think there's something a little bit unsavory about that.
Yes, well, we know we know that it's certainly a thing that certain directors like to do.
Yeah.
Naming no names in particular.
Well, we're going to move on then.
Moving swiftly on. It's Quentin Tarantino. Look it up. Anyway.
Do you want to get us sued? We're only 2 episodes in. Yeah, so moving on. So last week we started off with what Aidan's choice of film was, which was This Is Spinal Tap.
Yes.
So we're going to switch it up a little bit this week. So we're going to go with what my choice was. So I chose Knife Plus Heart.
Quel genre de film exactement?
Oh, arrêtez votre charme, faites pas le coup des types, ils sont pas renseignés.
Dans 2 minutes, je veux tous à poil et au garde à vous, plus raide que Giscard. On se soulage avec la main, on est à l'aise entre copains.
Coupé! Sur le plateau, il était du genre insatiable, les yeux illuminés.
So, Knife Plus Heart, or A Knife in the Heart, as it's known in its native France, is a 2018 horror thriller directed by Jan Gonzalez. Set in the late 70s, it tells the story of Anne, a gay porn producer who has descended into alcoholism after separating from her partner of 10 years, Lois. At the same time, a killer clad in fetish wear begins murdering the actors that participate in Anne's films, and she soon finds herself unravelling the mystery of who is targeting her boys. So, this film I chose because I had it recommended to me by a friend of ours. He sent me the trailer and was like, this looks exactly like your kind of film. And I watched the trailer. Yep. Yep. I watched the trailer and was like, you're right. That doesn't like my kind of movie.
Yeah. No, it's a very Mark from What Culture film, I'll say that.
You're going to run that joke into the fucking ground, aren't you? He recommended it to me, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to watch that. Didn't watch it for until obviously we started for this episode. I think that was probably about 10 months ago. He suggested that to me. And I kept meaning to watch it, and just never got around to it. And then when it came time for us to, discuss films that we wanted to have on the show, that was one that stood out to me, because I was like, well, it's like a modern style sort of Giallo-looking movie, and I know that you like that kind of thing. So I thought, fuck it, why not? Let's watch Knife Plus Heart, and I watched it. Do you want to give your thoughts on it? Because I'd actually like to know what you thought of it before I...
Well, we should probably say for the benefit of the listener, although none of this show is for the benefit of the listener, to be clear.
It's just us.
Yeah, it's just for our sake. But we do have a rule where if one of or both of us have not seen the film that we're discussing, as was the case with Knife Plus Heart, we won't share our thoughts until we're recording. So I don't know whether Mark liked this film or disliked it or what. I think having seen it and knowing Mark as I do, I've got a pretty good idea what his thoughts are on this. Because as I said,
enlighten me.
It's a very Mark Smith name and shame film. My thoughts on it are as follows. I mean, we wanted this to be more of a discussion than a review, but I pretty much thought this was really good, with some caveats. But I thought the whole aesthetic of the kind of... basically, what I'm getting at is this is kind of what I want more of the original Giallos to be like when I watch them. I think it has the kind of high camp, sort of trash art aesthetic that I want from more of the kind of quote-unquote classic Giallos. But it also has that... It's very tongue-in-cheek, I thought, as well. It doesn't quite take itself as seriously as some of the other Giallos. Which is not to say that it doesn't have anything to say. I think it does, and we'll get into that. It's a very aggressively queer movie, I would say. I don't think there's a single main character who is heterosexual, right? Like, pretty much all of them are. Because Vanessa Paradis and the lead character Anne is playing a lesbian, of course. I don't want to say
there is one. The one sort of heterosexual character that I can remember is there's the young lad,
that little twink who's gay for pay. So
who she recruits on a building site.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into this. That's a hell of a scene where she just rolls up on some kind of quarry. I think they're just breaking boulders or something, like breaking rocks, and she just turns up and there's this twinky looking guy there, and she's like, "Hey, do you want to be in gay porn?" And he's like, "No, I'm straight." And she's like, "Oh, I thought you were a bit more modern, a bit more cool than that." And and then next thing you know, he's in a gay porn.
Yeah, what I love so much about that scene is the way that he's like, no, I'm straight. Like, I'm not about that. So she just ignores him and just writes her number down and is like, yeah, ring me tomorrow, we'll talk about it. And he does.
Yeah, he's, for someone who is initially like, no way, I'm straight, he is very into the gay for pay lifestyle, which, you know, in for a penny, in for a pound, you've got to respect that.
I mean, clearly he's not making much money on the quarry, is he?
Well, clearly not, if he's ready to, well, yeah.
But I feel like there's, you know, that scene kind of says a lot about a lot of the elements of the movie, really, because it seems to be, it kind of talks a lot about people being drawn into that kind of world, and how, because, you know, like, you look at the main character Anne, like, she's this like gay porn producer, she's clearly had success,
yes,
and we're now seeing her at a point where,
well, she's well known enough by the gay community, because later on when they have the premiere of the film they make during the course of the film, people know her well enough that they approach her in this porno theatre.
Yeah, that's true.
And they know who she is. So she's clearly something of a fixture in the sort of Parisian gay underground, at the very least.
Yeah, and I mean, I like Anne as a character. She does some rather questionable things.
Yeah, she's a hot mess. Let's call it what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, the first time you see her, she's calling her soon-to-be ex, who was her partner for 10 years, a woman who called Lois, who edits the porn, edits the grot movies that they make together.
Grot movies.
the blue pictures, as Anne says at one point. The jazz movies. She's ringing her. This is the first time you see Vanessa Paradis as Anne. She's ringing this woman and just going on about, oh, you need to come and pick me up, I'm having horrific dreams and all this. And pretty much the first thing that Lois says to her is like, oh, you're off your head on drugs again. Which, you know, sets the tone for that character, definitely.
Absolutely, yeah. So you kind of get the feeling that, like, all the sort of excesses of, you know, working in porn and all this, it's very much gotten to her head, I think, is from what I can tell. Like. Yeah,
well, I don't think the movie is anti-porn, though. I think it's just...
No.
Yeah.
I don't think so, because, like, especially when you watch the clips that you see in a lot of, for, like, Anne's porn movies, they don't, because you see a lot of that. Like, this is the main thing, viewers. There is so much, like, just gay sex in this movie. I don't think I've ever seen a movie.
Not super explicit, though. You don't see
any... No, not at all.
You don't see any cock.
No, there's no, like, you know, hardcore penetration shots or anything. This isn't like a Lars von Trier movie.
There's no stiff, quivering rods.
I think you see a couple of like you know, little shrimps between people's legs, but like there's a lot of dry humping and a lot of, you know, simulated anal and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And when I say a lot, I mean a lot. There's so much. But yeah, it doesn't bother me personally.
What I thought was interesting, in the way that Gonzalez kind of frames all these, I mean, let's call them what they are, sort of twinky gay porn stars. It was very much in a style kind of reminiscent to what we call the sort of male gaze. But I've never really seen a film that kind of leans so heavily into, well, the male gaze, because it was kind of it was very I mean, to call it homoerotic is kind of it's like saying Kill Bill is a bit bloody, but it's
but also at the same time, it never, like, the porn scenes themselves, they never come across as like particularly sleazy. There's something kind of playful about them, because especially when you look at this as kind of like aping Giallo movies, typically Giallo films are full of naked women and heterosexual sex, and in a lot of those movies the sex is very graphic and very matter of fact, whereas there's something kind of a little bit more fanciful in Knife Plus Heart.
Yeah, there's kind of a naivete to the because we should say they're filming a film. There's kind of a film within a film. There's a few, but the main one is a film that starts life being called Anal Fury 5, and over the course of the movie becomes known as Homicidal, which
is a fucking great title.
Yes, which is Anne's sort of magnum opus. And what's happening is, whilst this masked killer is stalking the cast of this film, Anne is kind of making a film loosely based on those events. So you have this marvellous scene, which kind of typifies the production of Homicidal, where Anne, when the first fella is killed by the sort of gimp-masked murderer, who we should say is wielding a dildo knife. I don't know if we've mentioned this.
I feel like it's especially important that we talk about the dildo knife.
Yeah, it's sort of a switchblade hidden within a dildo, which is a hell of a move.
But we will come to that, because I do want to talk
we'll backtrack to that in a minute. But no, there's a scene where once the first fella gets killed, Anne is called into the police station and is kind of talking to these fairly uninterested coppers, both of whom they look completely like Giallo sort of bit players, right?
Absolutely.
You've got the one incredibly handsome copper who's sort of leaning on the desk and having a fag. And then you've got the other one who's, we should say for the benefit of American listeners, I meant a cigarette there.
Yes.
Especially when we're talking about this kind of film.
I feel like that has, like, we need disclaimers everywhere.
And then you've got the kind of weird bald guy cop who I think had a glass eye or something. Like there was something going on there.
He has like a really sunken eye, doesn't he? Like again, he does look like a day-to-day Giallo like secondary character. There's a real like authenticity about that scene, I think.
But yes, there's this. Yeah, in that scene, she's kind of describing what happened and what the guy who got killed was like, and all this kind of stuff. And then it cuts to basically a re-rendering of that scene within the context of being a scene from Homicidal / Anal Fury 5. And they've got the guy who I think is my favourite actor in the film, the blonde guy, who's playing
Archibald.
Yes, Archie. And he's dressed up like Anne, wearing her sort of fishnets and coat and all the rest of it.
and like leather trench coat. It's very... I don't know about you, but like, did you not immediately think Dressed to Kill?
I did think Dressed to Kill, and I thought that is a bold film to draw from.
Yeah, because again, I was like, if you're going to be drawing from these kinds of movies, you may as well go as lurid as Dressed to Kill is, I guess.
But that scene was brilliant. Because it cuts to the gay porn version of the scene, where obviously the policeman is getting very turned on by Archie version of Anne, and had one of my favourite scenes where the younger policeman in the porno version is told to keep typing up what Anne is saying, and he stands up with a massive chub on in his pants and starts humping the letters on the typewriter. And I thought, okay, if the fact that this film didn't have a switchblade dildo murder in the first 5 seconds, then this scene is what would tell you the kind of film you're watching.
Yeah, and I think like that's something that really stood out to me about it, because like I'm glad that you said you liked it, because I really, really liked it. I'd actually say in some ways I actually kind of loved it.
Yeah, the same actually, yeah.
Yeah, I think, we'll get to that more later on, but there's definitely caveats. Like, I would... This is not a film I would recommend to everybody.
I'd recommend it to everybody.
Yeah, I feel you won't watch it with your mum, would you?
Do you know what? It's one of those films where, as this podcast develops, you'll get a portrait of the movie taste of my mother. But it's a movie
I always look forward to stories of your mother's like exploits watching films. I always enjoy those so much.
I think my mother would enjoy this. I would never watch it with her, obviously.
I feel like she would get it.
I mean, she loves Dress to Kill, so I'll throw that.
There you go, then. Yeah. Well, that's a movie that I'd love to talk about at some point, but you got to tread carefully with that one.
Yes.
But yeah. I definitely really like the movie, and one of the things that I liked the most about it was those little strange parts where it felt like it would veer into black comedy or absurdism. That scene especially, like, because not only does the guy stand up with this giant chub on and starts, rubbing it against a typewriter, Archie's just getting a kind of weird foot job from him. From the other officer. And what makes that so funny to me is not only just how ridiculous the scenario is, just the fact that other officer just has a hole in his sock. And it's just like one of his toes is popping out, and I'm like, the entire picture that scene paints is A, just fucking ridiculous, but B, the fact that then you come out of the movie and see that Anne is directing the scene.
Yes.
And she yells cut, and she's clearly happy with that.
Yes.
To her, that was a good take.
We know this is her masterpiece. We know this.
Yeah, and again, like it's. I find it interesting that, like, when the film is just being straightforward and being about Anne and the killer and everything, it's presented in a very straightforward style that's reminiscent of Giallo, but I think is playing it a lot more seriously than what a lot of those Giallo movies were. And then the version of events that she's portraying is way more over the top and way more comical and feels more like actual Giallo movies.
But you kind of get the sense as well that she's somehow processing what's going on around her by turning it into a gay porn film, which which is a hell of a sentence.
There's a lot to unpack there.
There's a hell of a sentence. Well, because that's the other thing, she takes the role of the masked killer in the film version.
Yes.
Which I want to point out is one of the most Giallo tropes ever, is that they lead you to believe that it's probably Anne doing all the murders, and then it turns out to be some cunt you've never heard of. Which is basically the plot of every Giallo film. Is you kind of go, wait, is the main guy the killer? And it never fucking is. It's always some other dickhead.
I could maybe only think of one where the person that you think it is actually turns out to be them. But I won't say which movie it is because I won't spoil it for people. But they get round that by having that character pretend to slit their own throat.
Yes.
Earlier in the movie. That's how they get around that. But yeah, there's so many of those like little cool and weird little allusions to the genre, but for the most part, outside of the scenes that you see from Homicidal and there's another film that they make, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's called something else.
Oh god.
Doesn't matter.
I can't remember.
It doesn't matter, but like whenever you're seeing the snapshots from those movies, it's really ridiculous and strange. But everything else is played so perfectly straight, and I think that's kind of what I liked most about it, because all of the scenes where the killer attacks people are done really, really well. So this means that I'm mostly saying this so we can talk about the dildo knife, because that's really what I want to talk about.
This film should have been called Dildo Knife.
I feel like it may have reached a wider audience under that title. Because, Knife Plus Heart is a bit of a strange title. I do prefer the original title.
Which is a knife in the heart, yeah.
A knife in the heart, which is more of a, again, very typical Giallo
title. You often get this with foreign films, where they translate the title into English, but they don't translate it literally, and it just ends up sounding a bit weird. And like, it would have been better just to call it A Knife in the Heart. Like, that makes more sense. Or a knife in the ass.
I feel like it may have been on my radar much quicker if it was called that as well. Just because, I don't think Knife Plus Heart is a great title personally.
No.
And again, and also, A Knife in the Heart is a much better encapsulation of what the film's about, because, aside from the homicidal and the weird fetish wearing killer and stuff, it's a film about Anne. And it's a film about the fact that she clearly struggles with substance abuse. Her partner of 10 years has left her. And the only thing that she has is these films.
Yeah, and the kind of weird
that's like her coping mechanism.
The weird little family of boyish twinks she has around her at all times.
Yeah. And there's a weird sense of kind of like beauty in the movie, but I think it is lost under all the dildo knives and stuff.
Well, I think it's kind of it's a really interesting film, like aesthetically speaking. Because it does go for a very lurid tone in a lot of scenes. But then there are also a lot of scenes that are very dreamlike and kind of... kind of have this almost sort of elegiac feel to them. And I've always kind of, I think that's what I found so interesting about it, is that like a lot of films that you see that are kind of homaging a specific time period of horror, let's say, or a kind of, doing very blatant homages to one director's work, or a kind of subgenre or whatever, they tend to get very bogged down in just mimicking the aesthetics of just that. Whereas I think what was interesting about Knife Plus Heart is that it very much had its own tone, as much as it was going back and forth between, sort of campy late 70s gay porn, and then also very kind of lurid Giallo films of the 70s. You kind of have these scenes as well that are very very artfully shot, and like there's a scene which we'll probably talk more about towards the end, where there's this almost heavenly sequence of
yes,
it's almost a heavenly orgy at the end. And
I know exactly what you're talking about. I liked that scene a lot.
I think what I found quite striking about all the kind of gay orgy scenes, and I do mean all of them,
because there are several,
is that it was both shot in that very kind of like I was saying, sort of a homoerotic male gaze kind of way, but it felt very kind of as much as a lot of the films they were making were kind of campy and silly, and like there's one where they're in a dungeon, and like there's all sorts of stuff, like there's cross-dressers whipping the arse off some guy in one scene and stuff, but they're always kind of shot in this tone of very like playful, almost innocence, almost naivete, and I kind of found that like a really interesting way to frame that, because often you see sex workers and homosexual or transgender sex workers, both of which you see in this film, are kind of framed in a very
cold
way, or like almost like a sinful way as well. Whereas I think this film doesn't have that. It feels very sympathetic towards the people it's portraying.
I think Anne kind of puts that across, because she talks quite a lot when she's discussing her and Lois separating. She talks about I can't remember who she talks to. I just remember she talks about like, have you ever lost yourself completely in somebody? And when she's directing the actors, she's kind of she's not just going like standard porn directions. It's lose yourself in him, caress him, touch him. She's all about like passion between people, and I think that's exactly what her films do put across quite well. And I think that's why they have that sort of non-sleazy look about them. They're about love and passion. At least that's how Anne feels about sex, and I think that's
there's no shame or sin in the sexual act in this film, which is something that sets it apart from Giallo, and I think is something that brings out the very French nature of this film, for want of a better phrase, is that like sexuality and sex is portrayed as part of love and part of passion, rather than being this thing that is kind of repulsive or violent in and of itself.
What I did notice was, even though the sex is portrayed that way, the violence, however, is not. The violence is very porny in some ways. Yeah, it's very matter of fact. It's very blunt. There's the one death scene where I think that was the most apparent is I can't remember the character's name because I'm really, really bad at this. It's Thierry. I think that's his name, Thierry.
Yeah, it's Thierry. Yeah. So he's for the benefit of the listener, he is one of the gay porn stars who at the start is always bitching about money. He's not getting paid enough, blah, blah, blah. And Anne's kind of fobbing him off. And you kind of come to understand that he's a smackhead, basically, so that's why. So it's not that Anne's fobbing him off completely, it's just that he's always bitching about money because he always needs money for drugs, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of the little character arc that you see with him.
Yeah.
And it does lead to one of my favourite lines in the film where someone says to him, you need to lay off the heroin, you're barely even hard.
Yeah, and so the scene in particular that really stood out to me in terms of the death scenes, because there's not that many death scenes in the movie. There's like a really small amount of them, but they're so well done and so violent and horrible that they really kind of stand out. But I believe his name's Thierry. I hope it is.
Yeah, it's Thierry. There's definitely someone called Thierry.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
So if this is wrong and this goes out and this is wrong.
Look, if it's wrong, I'll add in a fact-checking goblin. It's a character that I hope we've not had to resort to yet, but if we ever do get something wrong, we'll catch it in the edit, and I'll unleash the fact-checking goblin.
I'm the fact-checking goblin, and Mark was right. The smackhead character's name was Thierry, played by Felix Maritain. Now back to the show.
So the scene where Thierry, he's sat in a parked car in an alleyway, and he's just shot up some heroin, and he's just not with it. And the killer comes along, and basically the killer gets his dildo knife out with the blade sheathed, and starts very aggressively making Thierry suck on the dildo, and it's very violent and really horrible. And then
that is the most explicit scene in the film, I think.
Absolutely, and it's probably the most effective as well, because because we know it's a knife as well. Like, as soon as that scene started happening, I was like, I'm really not okay with where this scene's going. And again, like every time there's a death scene, the killer is panting and making these strange noises, and there's like a real aggressively sexual element to the way that he kills people.
Yeah,
and I liked how that was juxtaposed against the, like you say, the much softer, the much more sort of playful nature.
Well,
of the
that scene is intercutting with a scene from the gay porn.
The both murders with the dildo knife do that. The death scene at the start of the movie is also intercut with footage of the actor in the movie.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
because in the movie it's just him and another actor, and they're just doing it in like a barn, and it's quite soft and quite sensual. And then when the killer is with him, it's kind of veering into BDSM, and he's got him tied up, and it's a lot more violent and a lot more. There's no passion there. It's very devoid of that.
There's almost this kind of this juxtaposition between the sort of innocence and the kind of the horrific violence, which I thought was really interesting. I mean, the whole movie. Do you think? I mean, we might as well just get into this. Do you think?
Are we going into spoilers?
Oh, I always assume that we're always full spoilers.
That's fine. I mean, for future reference to listeners, like, we're going to get into spoiler territory. So, if you are planning on watching this movie, please do. But we are now going to be discussing the ending.
Well, I mean, I wasn't necessarily going to jump straight to the ending, but what I was going to say was, what do we think this movie, if anything, is trying to say? Because I feel like there's stuff going on under the surface here that maybe I wasn't quite getting all the way. But certainly to me, I've seen a lot of people online, because I did do a little research. There seems to be a kind of theme online that people kind of see that there's some kind of sort of allegory for basically the AIDS crisis. I think because of the setting, because it's like 1979.
I can see that. I didn't see that myself.
I think there's some of that going on, because there's this scene in the middle of the movie where they go to the bar, and there's these sort of transgender sex workers that they meet and pick up for the film later on. This is after that point, where they go to like a weird cabaret performance.
Where the woman's being mauled by the bear.
Yeah, and there's some line in the cabaret as well that stuck with me where she says, tonight we come, tomorrow we die, which I think was kind of evocative of this thing that, like, these people who are kind of living this sort of Paris is burning lifestyle are very shortly going to be hit with the AIDS crisis, because this movie's set in 1979,
something like
correct?
that. Yeah, I believe so. 1979.
The late 70s.
In the summer of 1979.
So the AIDS crisis is round the corner. Yeah. I'm not meaning to get too heavy on the pod, but like I don't know if I'd say the movie is about that, but there's definitely some parallels. Like the very fact that, like, when they go to the police, the police are pretty open about this isn't a priority case for them. And at that point in the film, when they're saying that, it's like, fucking hell, 3 people have died, haven't they? Like, you kind of go, what's going on? Like, there's a serial killer, and you guys are just doing nothing. And I thought that was very reflective of, the government, like, various governments' response to the AIDS crisis, where it's just like, well, it's just the homos getting, isn't it?
I completely get that. Yeah, because in context of the film itself, if you kind of take away the whole AIDS part of it, like that interpretation of it at least, that was a point in time where the police likely would have just turned away. They wouldn't have
Yeah, especially because if you're a sex worker, they didn't care. If you're gay, they didn't care. So if you're both,
exactly,
you might as well have not existed.
They would probably see it as like vigilantism.
In fact, I know for a fact, incidentally, just a little tidbit of information to make people's stomachs churn. So serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer obviously preyed on the gay community in America. And that scene with the cops in this really made me think of a story that I heard on a true crime podcast, where one of his victims basically managed to escape Dahmer's house, made an escape.
I know this story, yeah.
I some locals kind of helped him and get to the police station. I'm not really sure about that part, but the police basically ended up driving him back to Dahmer's house because they were like, I don't know what to do with this guy. And then Dahmer came out and was like, oh, it's just a gay thing. Don't worry about it. It's just gay stuff. It's fine. We're just being gay. Get him back in the house. All the while, this guy's going, this fucking guy tried to kill me. Like, you know.
The guy didn't speak English, from what I remember.
Yeah. So I think that was part of it as well. But like,
yeah, they couldn't understand him.
But like, clearly in distress. Clearly,
yeah,
you know, nothing is quite right in this situation. And the police's attitude was, well, it's just gay stuff. Leave it alone. And then that guy unfortunately was killed. And you know, one of the police officers behind that became a decorated police chief. So there you go. So I definitely think this movie is talking about that kind of thing. This idea of like, God, I'm forgetting the phrase, but invisible victims is definitely a theme in this. And I thought that was really interesting in context of it being kind of a Giallo homage, because normally in Giallo movies, you're right, it's a very heterosexual perspective and it's very much about titillation. So although you're getting a lot of gore and a lot of murders and stuff, the emphasis is more on, in this scene, kind of woman's tit fall out than it is on a lot of thematic things.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I think the sort of the queer angle that Knife Plus Heart has, I think, in some ways really kind of factors into those sort of Giallo tropes, like say what we just discussed about the police not helping them. That, within the context of the story, completely accounts for why the police aren't around, because in most Giallo movies they're not. Like, the police they just turn up and they don't do anything. They're really, like, the police are so ineffectual.
Yeah, it dovetails so well into the tropes of Giallo. You're right. Yeah, where she becomes kind of Anne becomes kind of a private investigator by dint of the fact that the police aren't doing anything.
Yeah, even down to that scene where, because the killer leaves a feather at each murder, which again, Giallo trope through and through. So she goes to speak to like an expert on birds to find out where this feather. I was like, yeah, that's just the most Giallo scene ever. Like,
that is one thing I did want to bring up in this discussion. Is
I feel like I know what you're gonna say.
There's a fucking weird digression in the middle of this movie, right? Well, you're right, because the killer, it turns out, leaves a black feather behind during every kill. I mean, first of all, this killer has so much business going on already. He's already the gimp mask killer, the dick knife killer. Now he's the black feather killer. Okay, fine. He's got a lot of stuff, you know. He's throwing a lot of branding ideas out there. But so she goes to talk to this bird expert, as you're right, and then she ends up going to these woods and she to figure out the identity of the killer. She ends up going away from Paris into some fucking weird backwoods area, where she ends up staying at this. I guess it's like a B&B, right?
With it's like an inn, yeah.
Yeah, with this weird dude and his weird daughter, his adult daughter, and she shows Anne around the woods, and they talk. I don't even fucking know what was going on at this point, I'll be honest with you. There's a big wooden pyramid. Oh, the bird expert is the guy. Sorry, yes, the bird expert is the guy. Who's outside the big wooden pyramid.
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
Sorry, I was so baffled by this sort of 10, 15 minutes stretch of the movie.
I know exactly what you're about to mention because it happened and I was like, what?
Yeah, so it's the bird expert and this woman that he knows, right, and they're talking to Anne. And he busts out his goblin claw. There's no other way to say it. He has this weird big prosthetic goblin claw.
It's like a bird's, it's like a bird foot, isn't it? Like,
yeah,
it's like a bird's claw. And I was like, oh, he has a genetic defect. I was like, what, is he a fucking bird?
Yeah, yeah, right. And then never addressed again.
Yeah, they just show a close-up of it, and that's it.
Which, to be fair, is very, very Giallo. There'll often be scenes in a Giallo movie where something like that will happen, or they'll just bust in something like, well, she's psychic, like 40 minutes into this film, and you go, sorry, that was something that was possible?
And again, I also feel like the most Giallo thing that this film does is like what you mentioned earlier, where you get the reveal of the killer at the end, and it is a character that we've never even fucking met before.
Yes, so since we've veered into spoiler territory, we can get into the ending a bit. So it turns out for the benefit of people who haven't seen it and don't care about spoilers, it turns out the killer is a fella who, he's a gay fella as well, He was having a secret affair with this other lad when they were both fairly young boys. The father of the other lad found out, murdered them both, and burned down the barn that they were having an affair in to hide his nefarious crimes. Right?
With the boys inside. Should we add?
Yes, with the boys inside. So our killer emerges disfigured and amnesiac from that. A crow helps him.
Yeah, because they talk about that. There's the whole thing with the crows who take the suffering away from people. That's like the most underbaked part of the plot.
Yeah, they're like blind crows. Anyway, there's some kind of supernatural spirit guardians, and slowly his memories kind of come back to him a little bit. He goes to Paris, watches one of Anne's jazz movies, and it turns out I wish I'd written down the title of the movie because it's something like Spunking into Nature or something ludicrous, but it has spunk in the title, I'm pretty sure.
It does. I want to know. I'm just checking the plot synopsis now to see if it's mentioned. Okay. I don't think it is.
Well, you search for that one, but essentially what he sees on the screen is kind of a pornified version of his life, but with a happy ending. So this is the first victim in the film is in this movie, basically playing him, right, or playing the equivalent of him in the gay porno movie.
Yeah.
But so the killer sees that, and what happens in the porno movie is these two guys are going into the barn to have an affair. You see the father approaching with a knife, and then he puts the knife down and gets involved vigorously, and it becomes a gay threesome. They then burn down the
barn,
the wood cabin, the barn rather. Yeah, they burn down the barn whilst dancing around and, if you'll pardon the expression, having a gay old time.
Yeah.
So we also find out that, obviously, because Anne reuses the same cast over and over again, all the people that the killer's been killing are the cast of this movie. And there's a weird wrinkle where the guy who was working at the quarry who's gay for pay looks exactly like the guy who played...
I was confused by that too.
Yeah, it's a really weird, convoluted thing where at the start of the movie you hear that one of the gay actors has fucked off somewhere foreign, right? But they find someone who looks exactly like him working at the quarry, and this is the gay for pay guy. And then there's repeated scenes where people are like, oh, I thought you were this other guy, and it turns out he's not. So when the killer approaches this guy thinking he's the actor who's now, not in the country, it's a very weird situation, but he also looks so much like his former gay lover that he can't do it, right? That's the thing. He tries to kill him, but he's like... No.
But what was also weird to me was that guy who is supposedly straight goes into the dark room where men are basically, gonna, roger each other. I was like, okay, so is he now into guys? Like, I don't know.
Right.
Is that
First
that
of all, can we address there's a dark room above a cinema, a porno cinema, admittedly, but that's some weird shit. You just pay a few francs, get a red light, and have a look at what's going on. And what's going
it's a live sex show, yeah.
And what's going on is it's sodomy.
Yeah, basically.
Well, I think to be fair, Mark, this young lad who's been who was supposedly straight. Let's be real. He spent the last week or so getting rogered 6 ways from Sunday by twinks.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, clearly Anne has awoken something in him by doing that.
Because I think, to be fair, when he's looking through the dark room, he's not like... Ooh, he's kind of looking around with curiosity.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah. It just kind of felt weird to me that, especially because whilst he's watching the film, a patron of the cinema almost starts to try and chat him up, and he's kind of not into it. So yeah, I just thought that was a little bit odd.
Although one of my favorite character details about Mr. Gay for Pay, whose name, the reason I'm avoiding saying his name is that his name is Nuns, Nans.
Yeah, we should be very careful what we say there.
Yeah, as soon as I heard that name, I was like, we are going to struggle saying that multiple times. But so Mr. Nuns, he is watching the movie. Yeah, there's a really charming shot of him watching the porn film where he's like leaning on the seats in front and he's rapt.
Yeah, really doughy.
He is absolutely entranced by the movie. And that I thought was a really endearing character detail.
Yeah, I liked that a lot. I thought that was great. Yeah, especially because like you're then seeing what he's watching on the screen.
I know.
It's just, I mean, and it's just the most ridiculous.
In fairness, I
shit.
want to see Homicidal. It looks funny.
I was thinking the same. I was like, do you know what? I'll watch this. This looks great.
Especially the bit where Archie is masturbating in the phone booth and then he does his beans all over his own face. God, my mum's going to listen to this. Anyway, so I just think by way of closing remark, because we do need to move on to film 2, but by way of closing remark upon Knife plus Heart, I just really wanted to talk about the end sequence. There's kind of two sequences really that I want to talk about. The first being when they unmask the killer, and he's this kind of this freakish, deformed guy. But it's not any of our main protagonists who sort of finish him off. All the guys in the gay porno theatre, who, it should be said, until now we've mostly seen wanking whilst watching a film. Apart from the one guy, my favourite supporting character, who approaches Anne as she's watching this gay porn film she directed and goes, "I've seen all of your films and this is your masterpiece."
Yeah, Homicidal is her masterpiece, apparently.
I mean, what a guy. He's a real appreciator of the art. But so what happens is when they reveal this killer, because obviously all the gay community know about this guy, and because we've seen earlier on in the movie, Archie even says, like, no one wants to work with us because they think, like, there's this guy killing all our actors. Well, there is this guy killing all our actors. So clearly, like, the gay community knows this is going on, even if the rest of the world isn't really paying attention. Yeah, and they all kind of come together. All these sort of gay guys in the movie theatre kind of come together and
just straight up fucking kill him.
Well, yes, he gets run through by let's face it, the twinkiest twink who ever twunk.
Yeah, he picks up that dildo knife and just fucking goes to town.
This angelic looking young fella kind of steps forward and stabs the guy up. But I thought what was really interesting about that scene, I'm using the word interesting too much, it's a nothing word, but what I thought was kind of an interesting choice by Gonzalez there was that there's no real victory moment in that.
No,
like it's shot quite coldly, and the guy the young lad who does the killing, he doesn't like. There's no. It's not like the end of Death Proof. Tarantino's getting a lot of airtime.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like the end of Death Proof where the chicks kill the chick killer, and it's presented as this victorious.
With like a freeze frame and...
this kind of cathartic moment from all the tension.
Well, it focuses more on Anne, doesn't it? It looks more at her reaction to everything.
Yeah, and I think it's just kind of... There's a lot of conflicting emotions going on in that scene. I think there is a pity for the killer as well.
Because he's clearly a deeply disturbed and traumatized person, and... Yeah,
and he wanted the same thing that ultimately the people who became his victims wanted, which is to live... his life as he saw fit, and to live and to have that love that he had in sort of safety. And I thought, for a movie that's pretty sleazy and pretty funny for most of its runtime, there's something very striking about that final murdered scene. I say murder, it's kind of it's vigilante justice, I guess.
Yeah, the couple of them hold him down whilst the twink stabs him up, like.
We've all been there. We've all been there.
No, only.
But yeah, and then from there we go to this scene that I kind of referenced earlier. This sort of because we should mention, I don't think we've actually said this. Lois unfortunately gets killed.
Yeah, she does. Yeah, we've really not talked about her.
Yeah, we should probably rewind a little bit. So throughout the movie, we see that Anne and Lois have this kind of toxic relationship. It says they've been together for 10 years, but they've only recently just broken up.
Yeah, and I think that might be because, like, when we see Anne at the start of the movie, she's clearly like an alcoholic, and I get the feeling that. Again, because I feel like this film's kind of talking about like passion and sex and like excess as well, and I feel like because it looks at like the porn industry as being like even though the films that it presents are kind of soft in what we see, it's still very like hedonistic and maybe I feel like
and the film makes it clear that like there is hardcore penetration in these films, even though we don't see it.
Yeah, absolutely, and I feel like maybe as time's gone on, Anne has very much become kind of swept up in these things, and and that's probably why her relationship with Lois declined.
For sure.
And I feel like maybe because Anne Anne's motivation in making Homicidal is to win Lois back. Like, she wants to impress her because Lois edits the movies, and she wants to bring her back to show that she still has passion for what she does.
And we see that it's working a little bit, because when Lois is cutting some of the films, she's there like, oh, Anne, you get crazier and crazier by the minute.
Yeah,
and
like, she's clearly into it.
Yeah, it's clearly appreciating the film. There is one scene that's quite hard to watch, though. I think you'll know the one I'm talking about.
Absolutely, yeah. That was very jarring.
Anne, well, there's no other way to put it. Anne essentially kind of assaults Lois.
Yeah, in a drunken stoop.
If people need me to evoke it further, what I'll say is she assaults Lois in a Trumpian manner, and I think we can all move on from there.
But I know, that scene is... Considering this is a film about a guy in fetish wear that stabs people up with a dildo knife, that was the most horrific and most jarring and shocking part of the movie to me. Like, just because even though like we know that Anne is clearly grieving over this like lost relationship, and she clearly is a little bit dependent on booze, and her headspace, she's not in a good headspace. I mean, you just have to look at the film she's making to get a sense that she's a few sandwiches short of the full picnic at the moment.
Which is an interesting turn of phrase, because a picnic features prominently in this film.
It very much does, yes. And yeah, that scene where Anne forces herself onto Lois, like that's the point where I was like, right, okay, so I had a lot of sympathy for Anne, and now I'm like, well, clearly she is a bit of a monster then. Like, she's capable of this.
Yeah,
maybe
and
this
I
is
think
why
it's
Lois
there
doesn't
to,
love her anymore.
I think it's there to be a parallel between her and the killer, and I think we are supposed to see parallels between her and the killer. Like, that's why she plays the killer in the porn film. I think it is Gonzalez saying, like, these two people are linked in ways they can't really understand. Like, and I think when we're focusing on Anne as the killer is being finished off, phrasing. Well, the killer is being killed by a twink in a porno theater. Which, can we just say, that's got to be in the top 5 causes of death, right?
Absolutely. That's how I want to go.
Stabbed by a twink in a porno theater.
If it doesn't happen, I'm going to be really annoyed.
I think you and me agreed that we were going to have a sword fight on a clock tower in the rain.
I thought it was a gunfight on an opera house, but I'm fine with either.
Either way. That's how we plan to go out.
Yeah.
That'll probably be the last episode of this podcast.
Probably, yeah.
Anyway.
You just can't hear us, just rain.
Anyway, the point what I was making is...
this is a serious film.
Well, I mean, serious-ish. And, so I think it's important that we see a parallel between Anne and the killer. And I think the film is drawing comparisons between the two of them. Anne is not as monstrous as the killer, obviously, who is literally a serial killer, but she is driven by desperation and kind of isolation from the world in a way, especially in the sort of 1970s, where as much as these people are very open about who they are, and no one seems to be ashamed about it, the main society would not be as tolerant of them as perhaps it would be today, or you'd hope it would be today. And I think that's part of it as well. Is like, because I've definitely seen, or rather, I've read kind of sort of queer literature along the lines of people kind of talking about how gay and lesbian and bisexual, I suppose, people kind of get into sort of toxic relationships, or did get into toxic relationships, especially at a time when they didn't have a lot of other options. Like, open gay people weren't two a penny in those days. So if you were,
see that in the movie,
well, yeah, exactly, yeah. And you even see a little bit of that, because there's the guy with the beard, the director guy, who's one of the best characters, always got a fag on and something brilliant to say. But his sort of lover, they kind of have an open relationship.
Yeah.
And there's a bit where he very pointedly says, whatever the guy's name is, so-and-so, sleeps with whoever he wants and I sleep with whoever I want, and that's fine. But you definitely see in the guy's face that, like, that's not how he'd want it. And there's definitely a sense of, because these people can't exist in the world as they would want to, kind of openly, they are sort of forced into these weird pockets and these kind of strange little bubble industries as well, like the gay porn industry. Or like the transgender kind of sex workers that you see as well, where it's like, at that time, what other work could these people have? Like, they have to present themselves as fetish objects to some degree. And I think the film is really sympathetic to all the characters, even
I agree. Yeah,
even the Dick Knife Killer, and I think that's what really struck me about it. Yeah.
Everybody in the movie, even the killer, is motivated by passion, by love. It's all. I mean, you say about these little pockets of societies. There's the scene where Anne goes to the underground gay club, and she gets to the door and is greeted, and is it's a password. It's like the secret society that she's going to.
And I think the thing that's equally telling about that scene is she just goes, "I'm a friend of Lois's," and the guy goes, "All right."
Yeah, just knows who Lois is. Yeah,
and it's that is what these underground cultures were like in a city. All these people would have known each other and would have crossed paths and would have intermingled in that way. And I think it really captures that society, or that kind of microcosm of a society, really well. And and it kind of has the pros and the cons of that, in that these people clearly have surrounded themselves by people that they can be themselves with. I mean, I've got to shout out the guy they call the Golden Mouth.
Oh, probably my favourite side character in the movie. He's just a fluffer.
His whole job is that he sucks their dick, the actors' dicks, to get them hard when they're between takes. And it's later revealed, when pay disputes come up again, another character asks him, how much money do you make? And he just goes, oh, I don't do this for the money. I live with my mum. I'm fine. So he just turns up on set and starts sucking dick. Morning, noon, and night.
And honestly, good for him. Good for him.
I mean, he's living his best life. He's living his best life.
And also, he's safe from, the killer never targets him either. He's just safe.
Yeah.
But no, I completely agree with everything you say. I feel like it is such a good representation of, what sort of, camaraderie that those sort of people would have. And, the people that are involved in the porn, they feel like a family. They support each other.
I think that's part of what they're doing with the sort of gay for pay guy, Mr. Nans, he's I think what he's experiencing when he's kind of, and again, this is all very you have to read it in the actor's facial expression because he's a supporting character really, but he's feeling that sense of community and kind of belonging to this weird sort of tribe almost, which he doesn't have anywhere else, because he's a straight man. And society kind of, allows him to be who he is in the open, but he doesn't have that sort of close-knitness that he finds with the sort of weird gay porn people.
I mean, Anne literally, plucks him out of thin air and makes him a star. She literally gives him a whole new life. She kind of indoctrinates him into what they're doing.
But makes him a star in a very insular way. There's a certain subset of people who know exactly who he is,
Yeah.
But the other thing I wanted to say before we move on is, yes, the ending, the actual ending, the final sequence. We go from the killer in the cinema being shanked up by a twink. Then we have a kind of a selection of scenes where Anne is kind of narrating the killer's life for a little bit. I thought that was kind of interesting. I thought it was interesting that they cut the narration off before he becomes the killer. She's telling the story of him as a young lad, and then
it feels like Anne understands him. She understands that he was completely driven by passion, and because I feel that is one of the core themes of the film. I think passion is really one of the things it's about, and it's about how
Anne,
that can be corrected.
Anne and the film understand him.
Yeah.
I think Gonzalez is allowing him to be a human being and not just a masked lunatic.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's something that is subverting from the Giallo genre to some degree.
Absolutely. Especially where, and again, Italian, not even just Italian cinema, but a lot of cinema of that time, gay characters were either comedy relief or vilified, and this actually kind of gives, sort of strips back the layers a little bit and does actually humanize them. And he is even though he's a dildo knife wielding killer, there is a lot of, he's very sympathetic as a character, I think, and you kind of understand why he does what he does.
Yeah, you understand how he was driven to become what he is.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of these films don't really do that. This film puts a lot of special mention on the circumstances that lead to him becoming the killer, whereas in a lot of these other Giallo movies, they just have somebody at the end explain it.
Yeah.
This actually takes time to develop it and give you... Because, there's some really horrific stuff in those flashbacks.
Yeah. And he's certainly... The guy, I'm sorry, I don't have the name in front of me, but the actor who played the killer does a fantastic job with not very much dialogue as well. and being under a mask and being under prosthetics as well, and kind of, but manages to convey that very, like the scene where he goes to kill Mr. Nans, and then on seeing him, he so resembles his past lover that he can't do it. Like, that was such a powerfully acted scene. I don't know about you, but that really got to me.
Yeah, because I was expecting the ending to be this Giallo style bloodbath, and it's not. It's so different, and it's again. That's why I actually say I did love this movie. I love the fact that it took all the things about Giallo movies that I really like, and turned them into something a lot more interesting with a lot more going on under the hood than what a lot of these movies do. And I feel like this is the kind of film I'm going to watch again because there is more to it. I feel like I can't really. I feel like I'm going to be repeating a lot what you've just said, but I completely agree with you.
I think we were both very taken with this. We've talked at some length, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the very final sequence. So once we've had the sort of scenes from The Killer's Past and Anne's narration, we go to this sort of we go back to the porno set more or less, but it's this kind of weird heavenly representation of the porno set. And we've got all the sort of remaining guys are kind of, getting it on, having a bit of orgy. I think there's some new guys in there as well.
Yeah, but Archie's going around doing his thing,
Yeah, Archie is dressed as a satyr for this scene because he is living his best life.
Yeah, honestly, I want a sequel just about him.
We barely mentioned Archie, but I want him to be a surprise to new viewers because he's such a great character.
He's such a delight, like he really is.
Do you know who he really put me in mind of? And I'm struggling to think of the actor's name. But do you know Phantom of the Paradise, the character Beef?
Yes. There's
something about the camp but slightly butch look to him that kind of really evoked Beef for me. And the kind of the flippancy of his remarks towards people. But yeah, so we've got Archie kind of going around dressed as a satyr, and then we kind of pull out and we see that it's a film set and Anne's there, and the kind of bearded director guy and the cameraman are there, and all this. And the credits start to roll, but then they stop, and we get a little bit more movie, where Lois turns up, and we're supposed to understand, I guess, this is a spiritual representation of Lois.
Yes, it's a spirit, yeah.
And Anne kind of goes over to her and they have some wordless nuzzling, I think. And then Lois kind of disappears, fades away, and the director guy kind of summons Anne back, and then they kind of film the rest of the scene with this kind of... we should shout out M83, did the French electronic artist.
Yes,
did the music
soundtrack.
For this.
Amazing soundtrack.
Amazing soundtrack. Clearly evoking Goblin. From the Argento soundtracks, yeah.
Yeah, like they're clearly made with such like love and affection as well.
But so the music kind of comes up again, and then the scene kind of ends where all the kind of white background kind of gets reduced to black as the lights come down, and there's this kind of bizarre blue lighting, and then the music doesn't just turn off; it kind of turns off by degrees until there's silence, and then you just have Archie and Anne exchanging a look of kind of understanding, but there's some kind of darkness to Archie, I think, in that scene, and Anne is kind of smiling for the spiritual reconciliation with Lois, I suppose. But yeah, it's a very strange and ambiguous scene, and this is a scene that this is why I think I want to watch this movie again, because I don't know about you, but I don't really know what to make of that scene.
No, I feel like I liked it, and I liked how it ended the film on this much more optimistic note, but I have no shame in saying I don't fully comprehend what it was supposed to all mean.
Well, this is a scene that people have linked to the whole AIDS crisis element of the subtext, I suppose, where they kind of think it's supposed to represent the sort of ideal of this kind of hedonistic gay subculture, and then the kind of lights going off and the music being turned down by degrees, and the kind of ambiguity between them.
That's the illusion being broken, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how much I buy into that as a literal interpretation of what's going on. I think you are supposed to interpret it more emotionally, but it seems a lot of people have that read of the film in general. So it's interesting. I think there's definitely supposed to be a juxtaposition between kind of the idyllic representation and then the music being turned down by sort of degrees rather than just fading out makes me think of to me, it does evoke kind of, one by one people kind of being taken out of the dream and kind of coming out of the thing.
Yeah, because I can totally see, like, looking back on it, I can totally understand why a lot of people have interpreted it in that, looking about like the AIDS crisis, because especially when you look at the death scenes as well, because the first guy is killed by being as they say, stabbed in the rectum, so anal penetration.
Which, by the
Second
way,
guy
reminded me very much of a Giallo classic, quote unquote. What Have You Done with Solange?
Yes.
Where the killer in that goes around killing nubile young women by shoving a knife up their vaginas.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
That'll sting, and that will sting.
Yeah. And so the first one, guy stabbed in the rectum, as they say, so anal penetration. Second guy, stabbed through the mouth, oral penetration. The third victim is stabbed from behind. It's all very evocative of sex, essentially, and I can sort of see why that reading is there. Do I think it's about that? Not entirely. I feel like if I watched it again through that, knowing that and through that lens, maybe I probably may see it like that. But
I think the time period to me is what makes me think of that, I suppose.
Yeah, it all adds up, I think.
Yeah.
But I'm not entirely sure if that is the intention of the movie.
I think there's a lot going on under the hood. I'm not sure that you could necessarily... Not to say that the film's incoherent, but I don't necessarily think you could come up with one kind of cogent thesis about what's being
it's
said.
definitely open to interpretation, I think.
Yeah, and all the better for it, in my view.
Absolutely, yeah, because I came out the other side of it having really, really loved it as a movie, but we'll completely say that I didn't quite 100% understand exactly what it was trying to say, but I don't necessarily need to completely know what a film is trying to say to enjoy it. I feel like I got an emotional response out of it.
Yeah, this is what I was going to say. I think it made a certain emotional sense, especially that last scene, because I think the problem is I'm finding it hard to articulate what that scene sort of in between this end and the full credits roll. I think I'm finding it hard to tell what that scene made me feel as much as what it meant. Because it kind of leaves you with this very it's very French of them, but it leaves you with this kind of je ne sais quoi,
Yeah. I think that I would like to definitely watch this again and maybe try and piece together more what I think it's actually about. But on a first watch, it definitely resonated with me in like you're saying, like a more emotional way. And I think that was completely satisfying enough. And I feel like maybe, to my mind, the ending is Anne is reconciling with Lois's spirit. She's looking at Archie, and they're just sort of going like, okay, everything's fine. This is what we're doing now. Like, we're going to continue on, and we can, things are getting better. But then, as you say, the music starts to fade out, and so do the lights. And it's like, okay, maybe it's trying to say, look, if it is going for this AIDS angle, we're here currently, and everything is fine, but we're not.
Yeah,
like, everything's going to go badly.
How long
the darkness is coming.
Yeah, how long can this last? Yeah, the Parisian kind of subculture of hedonistic kind of homosexuality.
Especially when you consider as well that because Anne is a producer and director of these movies, she is actively facilitating this lifestyle.
Yeah.
Like she's like poaching, straight guys into this. She's bringing other people into something that could potentially endanger them if that is the way that you're interpreting the movie.
Well, quite literally, she is the reason that these people were in the line of sight of this killer. Yeah,
but unintentionally so. Like in that.
Yeah,
regard.
of course.
Like
but then
how was she to know?
That links it even more, though, of course, to the.
Yeah, she's So maybe I feel like that is a very valid reading. Then I guess the more we talk about it, the more it makes sense.
I mean, like I said, I'm not advocating for one particular reading. It's just I didn't really think of that when I was watching the movie, but then when I read a few pieces that kind of spoke about that, or I listened to a couple of podcasts even as well for plagiarism purposes.
Of course,
they they kind of discussed this idea, and I thought that was it's the kind of thing where, cause I should shout them out actually. A podcast that I'm going to listen to more episodes of. Did an episode on this called "Screaming Queens."
Yes, I've heard about this. Yes,
and it's a bunch of British lads, and I believe they're all of a homosexual persuasion.
As the title would suggest,
as they they might be bi or whatever.
Yeah.
One of these new modern ones they have.
What, like just like much like myself, yes.
Yeah.
Thoroughly modern Mark, you can call me.
But I thought it was interesting when I was listening to that because they kind of all came out with this reading about AIDS and stuff. That just hadn't really occurred to me, I suppose, as not being a member of that community. So I thought that was quite eye-opening and worth mentioning.
Of course, yeah. I mean, obviously, I feel like that's the thing about this movie. Like, its inherent queerness is definitely its most interesting aspect because...
Oh, for sure, yeah.
In the hands of, like, another team, this would just be a straightforward, like, homage to Giallo movies. But adding in making it about, you know, a subset of Parisian gay and lesbians and transgender people who work within the porn industry, that gives it so much more, like, it adds so much more depth to it and allows them to actually kind of say things about the Giallo genre and subvert a lot of the expectations about the genre. And yeah, that its queerness is the reason why it's so interesting and why I would recommend it to a lot of people.
It's also very accessible, I think, to a non-queer audience.
Yeah, I'd say so, because even though you are kind of bombarded by a lot of the sort of sexuality of it, it's never gratuitous, it's never sleazy, the violence is sleazy.
Yeah, and it portrays it in this kind of almost innocent way, or this kind of playful, slightly quite charming way, really. I don't think there's anything about it that would be off-putting unless you happen to be, you know, a homophobe.
Yeah, and in which case, I don't think you'd be watching it anyway.
It's not for you, mate.
Yeah, like if for some reason you are opposed to homosexuality, I don't think Knife Plus Heart's going to be at the top of your watch list.
Yeah, and I mean, if you are opposed to homosexuality, just fuck off.
Yeah, just get out. Like, we don't want anything to do with you.
Don't listen to
Stop
this podcast.
Listening. If there are any of them listening at this point, like, thank you for sticking around this long, but fuck off.
On that bombshell. Shall we move on to the next film?
I think we should before the homophobes get us. They're coming, mate. They're coming.
Yeah, so my pick for this episode, I boldly went for a film that I've not seen before, which is unconventional. But it's a film that I sort of knew a fair bit about. One that I'd kind of had on the watch list for a while that people had recommended me. So my pick for this episode is Berberian Sound Studio.
Come this way, Gilderoy. Don't be afraid. A new world of sound awaits you. A new world that requires all your magic powers.
I didn't quite know I'd be working on this sort of film.
What did you expect?
What's your problem? I'll do this.
Francesco tells me you are trying to escape.
No.
There's no reason to escape. Gilderoy, this is going to be a fantastic film.
Berberian Sound Studio is a 2012 psychological horror film directed by Britain's own Peter Strickland. It stars Toby Jones as Gilderoy, who is both a deeply repressed man and a gifted Foley artist, working mainly in documentaries until he gets a job in Italy working on a mysterious piece called the Equestrian Vortex. Much to Gilderoy's surprise, the film turns out to be a Giallo horror, and he finds the disturbing imagery of the piece haunting his waking hours. Between the intensity of the film and the bizarre, callous behaviour of his employers, Gilderoy finds himself losing his sanity, his humanity, and his identity. So,
very nice.
Yeah, I put a bit of pepper on the sandwich on that reading.
You did a bit there. It was quite spicy. I enjoyed it.
So, Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch, what's your relationship with this movie? Because I've just said, you know, I've been meaning to watch it for some time and decided to use this podcast as an excuse to watch it. What is your sort of story with the Berberian Sound Studio?
Well, I'd seen it before. I watched it for the first time last year. It was part of my lockdown watching. So I'd seen it prior to this, and when you said that you were more than willing to sort of pitch it in as your suggestion, I was very happy because not only because I've seen it, I got to watch it again. So I I'll say I really, really like this movie. I like it a lot. I actually would say when I watched it again yesterday, I think I actually liked it more second time round, actually. But I really like the director, Peter Strickland. I've seen one of his other movies. I've seen The Duke of Burgundy, which I think is tremendous. It's such a great film. And I saw that one first. So Duke of Burgundy completely blew me away. I was like, I need to see everything else this guy's done. And I'd heard that Berberian Sound Studio was great. So watched it, loved it. Watched it again yesterday, and compared to the first time I watched it, and we'll get more into this and you'll understand why I bring this up, but I watched it with headphones for the first time yesterday, and that completely changed it for me. Like, that actually was just, that is the way to watch it.
No, I can see that. I think I want to rewatch it with headphones on, because I'll be honest, I was watching it with my partner last night, and she was dipping in and out, as she is wont to do. And it's certainly a film that, if you're watching it in a location where someone else is trying to go about their business, there are several points where you end up having to crank the volume up, crank it down, crank it up, crank it down. Because, sound design is a massive part of this movie. I mean, it follows the misadventures of a Foley artist. You get to see a lot of the process of making Foley for this kind of film within a film, which is a link it has with Knife Plus Heart, of course. There's films within films. So there's a lot of Toby Jones smashing fruit and vegetables against the floor or bashing them about with a hammer, and a lot of scream acting going on.
Very effective scream acting, I have to say.
Yes, very jarring, yeah.
And really, like, blood-curdling screams as well. Like, they're the kind of screams that really do kind of make you sort of sit upright. And
This is what's so funny about it, right? Is there's loads of this scream acting, but then the guy who's the producer for the film keeps going on the shits at screaming.
Yeah. Yeah, because, as you say, like, it's about Toby Jones's character, Gilderoy, who goes to work on this film. What's it called? The Equestrian Vortex?
The Equestrian Vortex, yes.
Which, can we just say, what a fucking good title for a movie.
Yeah, I really like the sort of brief kind of snippets of the film that you get, because you mostly don't see it. You're mostly hearing dialogue and audio being recorded for the film. But I love the kind of insight that you get into what the film is, because every scene that is described makes the film make less and less sense.
Yeah, because from what you gather, The Equestrian Vortex is a movie about witches who were tortured, like historically, and then they rise from their graves to get revenge and perform their satanic rites. That's what
I believe there's also an equestrian-based, so a horse riding academy, above the graves of these witches, which is very Suspiria, I guess.
Yeah, it's very Suspiria meets like Lucio Fulci. It kind of sounds like the perfect Giallo movie, and I'm honestly kind of sad that it doesn't exist.
But it's not a horror film. That's a key thing to remember.
No, yes,
it is a Santini film.
That's one of my favourite little things about the movies. The director insists that it's not a horror film, that it's the truth. Yeah, so I depict the truth.
The guy is a director called a guy called Santini, who's the director of the film. For the first sort of second of the movie, Santini is a discussed figure who you don't really see. And you start to think that he's not real until he turns up with his dog, which is another thing. Yeah. He keeps bringing his dog into the sound recording studio. And when the producer, Francesco... so Francesco is kind of the first sort of overseer figure that we meet in this movie. He's kind of fobbing off Toby Jones at the start, saying... Because Toby Jones, as Gilderoy, is kind of saying, oh, when is Santini going to be in? When is Mr. Santini going to be in? The producer Francesco is kind of saying like, he's very busy. He'll be in when he's in, sort of thing. But then whenever Santini does show up, he does nothing but hinder the production of the movie.
Absolutely, yeah. It kind of is to the point where like the only people that are really invested in making the film tend to be Gilderoy and the actors, really.
But I think Francesco is invested in making it, but frustrated by everyone around him.
I feel like Francesco is just more influenced by money. He just wants to get it done because it's costing him money. Because every time like Gilderoy asks for new equipment, it's always like a point of contention or just anything.
But he does say later on, we don't do this for the money, we do it for the art.
I don't believe that for 1 second.
No, I think it's interesting though, because he does critique the actors. He does kind of go like, oh, they're shit and they can't use their imagination and all the rest of it. So I think there's a push and pull with Francesco. I think, to be honest, without getting too ahead of ourselves in where the ending kind of goes, Francesco is what Gilderoy could one day become. You know, I feel like Francesco is kind of, he doesn't. It's not that he has no artistic inklings at all. It's just that he's so kind of worn down by everything, and kind of, you know, he's the classic kind of I'm surrounded by idiots. Because at the start, he's telling Gilderoy to kind of be reverent towards Santini, right? And then, but then later on, you see him, he's just cussing Santini out, and he's like, he's constantly telling, he's acting like, oh, Santini's a fucking bellend, basically, which he is, to be clear.
Yeah.
But, yeah, one thing that I thought, so to kind of backtrack a little bit, the movie starts with Gilderoy arriving at the Berberian sound studio, and he's kind of the first plot point is relatively innocuous. He's just trying to get his flight refunded. But
yeah, he just wants a reimbursement.
But they are just giving him the runaround constantly. The secretary won't deal with it. Francesco won't deal with it. Well, first of all, Francesco goes, "Look, talk to me tomorrow. We'll do it tomorrow." Then he comes up to him tomorrow and he goes, "Look, it's not my job. Ask the secretary." He goes over to the secretary and the secretary goes, "Oh, that's my job now, is it, to sort this out?" And he's just going round and round and round in circles. And you get the sense that this is a real 2-bit shyster operation. Because that's the other thing, isn't it? The first time Gilderoy kind of turns up and meets Francesco, they're watching that scene from the movie, which you don't see until later on. But you just hear these screams and this horrible stuff. And Gilderoy kind of reacts to it and goes, bloody hell, what's he doing to her, kind of thing. And there's a great exchange there where Gilderoy goes, Santini says something about equestrian. And Francesco goes, yeah, there's a horse riding girl. She's not riding a horse anymore. So
I like that a lot. Yeah.
You know straight from the off that they've lied to him about the nature of this film. And I'll be honest, I was wondering, can you cast your mind back to when you first watched this? Because I was really wondering where they were going with that, whether the nature of the film would be something that they would kind of explicitly spell out and be like, oh, it's a snuff film maybe, or like, oh, it's...
Yeah. That was originally where I was going. I was like, is this actually a snuff movie? And they're just getting Gilderoy to record the sound effects for it, because there was actually, because that point in time actually, with a lot of Italian cinema, it was shot without the audio. They dubbed everything out afterwards. That was like a really common way. Which is the reason why I feel like Giallo is kind of hard to get into for a lot of people, because the audio and the visuals are so weirdly disconnected.
Yeah.
It has this weird dreamlike feel to it.
And often the actors are a mix of kind of British, German, Italian, Spanish, and are not all speaking the same language. They're all just kind of speaking,
they're just
a mishmash.
Yeah, they're all saying their lines in their own languages, and I think that's why the acting in these movies is so strange as well, because like nobody knows how to react to one another.
Yeah, and they're then kind of dubbed over by Italians or English, depending on the version of the movie that you're watching.
Yeah, so and again, I like the fact that the film is about that, and like that's actually something that's like a big part of the plot. But no, I did think at first that they were going down the snuff route. I was like, is this actually a snuff movie? And Gilderoy's just making all the sound effects for it to make it seem like it's not a snuff movie. Like it's like a legitimate production. And obviously, spoilers. That's not the territory that it goes into.
No, it's going into something a lot more psychological and kind of abstract, I would say.
Yeah, because they make a point of... one of the actresses makes a point of asking Gilderoy, why do you think they got you to do this job? And again, like, I feel like that, when I first saw that line, I was like, okay, there's something more sinister going on.
Yeah, that's right, isn't it? Yeah, because she has that line, about, why do you think they got you to do the job? It's a question that's never really answered. Or at least I don't think it is explicitly. I mean, I'd have to watch it again to kind of form more opinions on some of the more subtle stuff.
I've watched it twice, and I don't 100%... understand that part still.
I think it's it's supposed to... I mean, my read on that after one watch is when she says that, what she means is... Because as we find out about Gilderoy, he basically, like, works out of his mum's shed, and he's a bit of a one-man
He's not their people.
Yeah. But I think that is why they hired him, because they can exploit him. Basically, is what she's saying.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, he's impressionable, and this is so far removed from anything he's ever done before.
Yeah, because he's just done nature documentaries pretty much. Oh, and children's sci-fi. Don't forget children's sci-fi. Which can we just address the so there's a scene where because they keep having power cuts, which is another thing. But there's a scene where they have the power cuts. He's using all his various props they're trying to get him to make sound effects, right? And I think Francesco says, "Oh, he can make the sound of this guy's amazing. He can make sound effect of a spaceship with just a radiator and a light bulb, is it?" And he demonstrates this, and it makes this kind of almost theremin-y sound. And they say, "Oh, he uses it for British science. He uses it for children's science fiction programs." Is that a shout out to Doctor Who from Peter Strickland?
I was thinking that when it happened, and I figured you would probably pick up on that. I feel like, it might actually be.
Because that is the type of bollocks they used to do on that all the time in the 70s, which is when this film is set. And I was thinking the whole way through about Gilderoy that this poor cunt just needs to find himself a job on Doctor Who. That's what he needs.
Yeah, because his talents would be much more appreciated.
Yeah.
But no, instead he's been lured to Italy to work on this really overly disgusting Giallo movie and be exploited.
Well, that was another question I wanted to ask you, was what do we think this film is like that he's watching? Because obviously the only thing we really see of the film is a fantasy sequence later, which we're not clear whether that is an actual scene from the movie or not, or whether that's his.
And we also see the opening.
Yeah,
we see, the opening
that's what I was going to say. We see the credits
to the movie.
Yeah.
Which are perfect. It's like, they're so spot on to those kinds of like Giallo movie openings. It's
Strickland
so good.
Really knows his stuff. I was going to ask you, how explicit do we think this stuff is that he's watching? Because part of me kind of thinks, this guy Gilderoy is so repressed and so kind of, sort of Middle English, basically.
Yeah.
That he's, and I was kind of thinking, is this film even that explicit, or is he just easily shocked?
I think it's a little bit of both, because what we're told happens on screen. Because this is the thing, like, to anybody who's not seen this movie, like Aidan said previously, we don't really see anything that happens in this movie. We just hear it. And we watch Gilderoy make the sounds for the movie. And the sounds that he makes are just horrific. You're told this scene, a priest pulls out the witch's hair, like just rips out of his hands. Obviously, you don't see that, but you see what Gilderoy does to make that sound. And just the sound alone of it puts that image in your head of what's going on.
Yeah, it's very evocative, because they do have... There's a kind of a guy who cues in the sound effects and the actors who are kind of dubbing over in Italian. And he'll briefly describe a scene that's happening. So, it'll be like, like that, like witch's hair being pulled out, or so-and-so getting stabbed in the heart or whatever. And then it will cut to what they're using to make the sounds, and it's incredibly evocative without even needing to see the image. I actually listened to an interview with Strickland where he was saying that he almost sees Berberian Sound Studio as the opposite of a film, because you're
because it's like a radio play.
And you're kind of just having... I think what he means by that, you're having the imagery described to you and then evoked without the image, if that makes sense.
And honestly, like, that's why I think this film is so effective, because no matter, like, just the sound, the description of the act and the sound that we see accompanying it is enough to make it far more disturbing than anything that could be shown to you.
Yes.
Like, especially, like, the scene with, like, the witch having her hair pulled and stuff. And, like, there's even some slightly more comical ones. There's a part where they say, oh, the witch is being drowned in boiling water, and it's just one sound guy with a cabbage just dunking it in water, whilst the other sound guy has just got a glass of water with a straw and just blowing bubbles into it.
Yeah.
And it's really, like, the sort of juxtaposition of the two things is fantastic. It's the violent stuff, I think.
Yeah. It's there's a lot of really cool and slightly quirky stuff as well, though. Like the woman they get in to voice the witch. and the guy who voices the goblin, which they just
I love those.
They just drop that in. He goes, "Oh, so and so's here to see you," and he goes, "Who is it?" "Oh, the goblin." And then you just hard cut to this actor, making these incredible sounds with his voice.
Yeah, because they describe him as the goblin stalks the girls in the riding school, and he's aroused. They specifically mention that he's aroused.
Yes, I just think
because that's the
sounds that he's making are so you know exactly what that would look like. It's so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again with the witch, the woman who's voicing the witch is she's incredible. I think that for me personally, I think that's one of the creepiest parts of the movie is just that woman in that sound booth just making those noises. Because it reminds me a lot of things like like The Exorcist and stuff like that, and it's just I like all those scenes because everything that nothing that Peter Strickland could show us is more disturbing than the sounds imply it is, and I think that's why it works. Like because some of the descriptions of what happens are pretty nasty. Because like they describe a red hot poker is.
Yeah, because there's a bit where Francesco, I think, Francesco, I think, is saying to one of the actresses about, it's a pretty common consensus that a red hot poker being shoved up a lady's vagina is shocking. He's trying to get a better performance out of her. Yeah.
It's he gets a red hot poker and does what we call an Angela Baker, which is a little reference to something else we might talk about on this channel. Deep cuts, yeah. So there's the scene where Gilderoy has to make the sound effect of that, and it's just him with the headphones on and a frying pan and like a little squeezy thing of oil, and he just has to squirt oil into a pan to make it sizzle. And it's such a strange movie, but one that I absolutely really do love and think it's such a unique and innovative movie. I think
it's interesting viewing it through the lens of kind of a homage to Giallo, because it is very much like if you're yourself kind of a Giallo buff, you can definitely catch all these references to different stuff that they're doing. Like I was saying, like the equestrian school with witches underneath, it's very evocative of Suspiria and a million other things.
Absolutely.
But also, it seems slightly to be not necessarily because when I was listening to this interview with Strickland, he talks about not being a didactic filmmaker. But I definitely get the sense that he is somewhat condemning some of the more shystery practices of these Italian studios at the time. And in fact, there is Santini has his #MeToo moment at one point in the film, where it is mentioned that, again, mentioned but not shown, where that he's, been feeling up one of the actresses. And it's definitely shown that most of the actresses are there because they're attractive, and, the various men around them want to...
Yeah, they have less than honourable intentions to them, and obviously because of the way that these movies are made, these are not the actresses that were in the movie. They are completely different. Like it's interesting that they hire these women, because they think they're attractive and obviously want to try and get with them, but these women aren't in the movie. They're being hired. The job is their voice.
And indeed, Francesco is constantly bemoaning the fact that they can't scream and they can't voice act and all this.
Yeah, because I think earlier on when I said that, I think I'll take back what I said. Like, Francesco is clearly much more interested in the artistic side of the film as opposed to what.
He strikes me as someone who he's just someone like my read on Francesco, and this is one of those films where you can also say, but none of these people are real and they're all in Toby Jones's head. But my read on Francesco is that he's just a guy who's been in this business for a long time. And he, because the way he speaks to Gilderoy, he's very condescending, and he's very, just do as you're told. Like there's that scene where he's constantly going on about the trying to get reimbursed and all this, and he says Gilderoy's always pointing out, oh, there's some technical issues with this, that, and the other, and Francesco's always fobbing him off. But there's that one scene where he kind of goes, look, being a professional is about just turning up, doing the work you're asked to do, and not complaining. And he has all these scenes as well where he's kind of saying oh, the polite thing to do when you meet someone is to be positive. Always start with the positive. Don't start with the complaint. Like, it's almost like he's talking to a child, and you get the sense that this is, a rigmarole that he's been through many, many, many times, to the point where he is kind of, he's not even seeing Gilderoy as a person. He's like, every time Gilderoy kind of reminds him that he is a person who's working for him rather than just a piece that Francesco can plug in, that agitates him. And I think you see that throughout the movie. Whenever these people kind of are in any way not just being a piece of the machinery, he gets agitated. So I kind of think the thing for me with Francesco is he is that classic producer where he just wants everyone to get on with it and complain as little as possible. Because I think he's whereas I think Santini is much more the charm offensive. He's much more waxing lyrical about all this stuff and kind of, he has all these lines about it's not a horror film, it's a Santini film, and he's this kind of very passionate seeming man. I mean, you also find out that this is clearly implied that this is all kind of bullshit as well, because ultimately he seems to mostly care about drinking cocktails with his lead actor and trying to cop off with the actresses, which... Can we shout out the male Italian voice actor, who I think is my guy of the movie, because he is just getting pissed constantly. And
every time he rocks up, he's just got cocktails in his hand.
And there's one bit where he just comes in while they're in the middle of like... because there's... Okay, so there's... to set it up for the benefit of the listener, so Gilderoy kind of develops something of an infatuation for one of the female voice actresses. But it doesn't really...
she's the only one who's like... She's the only one who's kind to him, essentially. Out of the entire crew, like, she's the only one who ever, like, shows interest in what he does. Like, she sees him as more than just, like you say, like a cog in the machine. She actually, like, wants to know about what he does.
But she ends up leaving the film because of Santini's wandering hands. And she ultimately destroys all of the sound tape that they've used to record her voice.
Her voiced work, it's all gone.
As a bit of a fuck you. And this is there's a great kind of tense scene where Santini and Francesco are playing this recording that she made, where she's calling Santini out for like, you did all this terrible stuff to me. And then the two guys are arguing in Italian. And you can see that Toby Jones doesn't know what's going on because he can't speak Italian at this point in the film. And is kind of going, she's even saying, what is she saying on the recording? And they're like, don't worry about it doesn't matter. In fact, Francesco turns around to him and goes, are you going to clean this up? As if that's Toby Jones' job. But the bit that killed me in that scene was when the lead actor comes in. He's like, we're all drinking margaritas at the front. Like, completely unbothered by what has evidently happened. And even seems unbothered when Francesco's like, look, can you just fuck off? But that guy is... That's some serious my guy energy right there.
One thing that I did notice, because we just mentioned about how eventually the actress leaves, is how, in some way, the events that we get told happen in the movie begin to echo what starts to happen in the studio.
Yes.
So we actually start to get like little parallels when they're talking about how they're doing scenes where the witches are being like manhandled by the priests. That's then shown against Santini getting a little bit handsy with the actresses and stuff. Like, you start to see these like parallels, and again, like, because this is obviously a psychological horror film, we're going to start getting more into this area of talking about it. And clearly Gilderoy is very deeply affected by the imagery. Like, do we think that, is he choosing to see things based upon the imagery that he's having to create sounds for? Or, do you think that he's imagining some of these things? Do you think those are coincidental? Like, what's your kind of reading on where Gilderoy's head is as the movie goes on?
I don't know, because there's this really interesting midpoint of the film where, because obviously all the way through the film you're starting to see his mental state kind of deteriorate as his kind of humanity is chipped away at by not only this kind of visceral imagery that is infecting him, mentally, but also just the horrible working conditions that he's in, basically, where everything he says is the wrong thing to say, and there's always some, pressure coming from someone. So yeah, you kind of see that his mental state is degrading. But there's a really curious scene where it's this really impressive psychedelic sequence kind of midway through the movie, where you start to see the film kind of degrade and kind of change and warp, and it literally does the kind of like the film stock burning out imagery, and then it kind of burns out to another layer of film, quote unquote, beneath, where you're seeing kind of British countryside and a nice narrator and a horse in a field, and like I think it's from that point on that the film just starts to get more and more like surreal.
Yeah.
Because the film hasn't really been that surreal up until that point. Like, it's been eerie, and there's been the way things are framed.
It is able to sort of get under your skin, but it's never to the point where anything particularly strange or particularly like supernatural happens. It's all just, here's some really horrible sound effects. Oh look, aren't the people involved in this film they're a bunch of bastards? It's kind of just that, and then this happens, yeah.
And then there's the sequence which is straight out of a Giallo movie, where he's visited in the night by here's the actress who left, isn't it? She turns up.
Yes.
And she's gonna because that's the thing. She's like, well, there's knocking on the door, and he goes to answer it, and then he kind of goes back to bed, and then she's there waiting for him with a knife, and then they fight, and then he kills her. And we're not clear whether that happened or not, because then we see it later on replayed, like he's watching that scene from within the studio, but it's him on the being projected on the screen, and then but he's talking Italian in the scene that he's watching.
Yeah, that's the detail I wanted to talk to you about. I love the fact that in that sort of strange when the movie gets really strange, just Gilderoy just starts speaking Italian, and we see scenes from the start of the movie played again, but he's speaking Italian.
We see the scene that we were talking about earlier, where he comes in and he says, "Oh, what kind of film am I working on?" And there's the discussion about she's a horse, she rides horses, but she doesn't ride horses anymore. And when they do that scene again, he's dressed like a Giallo protagonist with the kind of coat, and he's kind of sitting in a cockier way, and he's kind of like, it's very, very subtle from Toby Jones. I mean, he's a wonderful actor, but when you see the kind of sad sack Gilderoy from the initial version of that scene, and then you see the kind of Gialloified version of Gilderoy that kind of comes up in the repeated scene, it's a very interesting contrast, and I don't really know exactly what it's trying to say about his mental state, but I think there is a kind of metaphor in that of him. I mean, spoilers. The last shot of the movie is him literally walking into the projection, and the screen fades to white. So I think the idea is he's being subsumed not only by the film, but by the environment. And I think the symbolism that I was trying to get out of it anyway, and Strickland is the kind of director who says, like, it's open to interpretation. In this interview that I saw him, that I heard with him talking to someone about this film, he was actually even saying, like, you can interpret it this way, you can interpret it that way, you can interpret it. So I think he's very conscious about, like, I want an audience to be thinking along certain lines, but there's a lot of different ways you can take it. And I saw it as, like, him becoming one with the studio and the film itself is kind of, it's almost talking about kind of complicity, and kind of saying, like, I mean, there's a lot of layers that you can pick away at there, but I think that's the thing that I took away from it, where he's almost complicit in what's happening around him because he does nothing to stop it. And then obviously the kind of scene that directly precedes the kind of final shot of him walking into the projection and disappearing is a scene where they're trying to get a new voice actress who's replaced the old voice actress. They're trying to get her to scream, and she's just not doing it to Francesco's punishing standards. And he just kind of turns to Gilderoy, and I believe they're just kind of conversing in and out of English and Italian at this point. Because he turns to Gilderoy and says, "Go in there and get her to scream properly." And he's like, "Fine." Kind of gets up, thinks about it, comes back and goes, "Oh, it's easier like this." Changes some of the sound settings in her headphones, and then just turns up this horrible white noise. And she's saying to them, like, "Oh, there's something wrong with my headphones." They go, No, it's fine. And they're turning it up louder and like making the pitch more uncomfortable until she is screaming, and then she just throws the headphones down and leaves. So I think that scene very clearly speaks to the interpretation that we're getting out of, like, this is him becoming part of the system, you know, part of this constantly oppressive system. And I think that is reflected in the themes of the Giallo movie that they're making that we don't see, because there's talk in that of, you know, these kind of, in fact Santini even says about you know, the priests abusing these women, these beautiful women, as he says, you know, and he makes a point of that, to say, like, there's these beautiful women that they kind of dehumanized and butchered in this way, and ultimately isn't that sort of what they're doing? I mean, it is kind of what they're doing. I mean, they're not literally killing these women as far as we know, but they're, you know, using them up, and as we know, the women are selected for their beauty, despite the fact that they're voice actors. And,
they make a very explicit point of when they're casting the new actress, they're watching screen tests. And probably the line that stands out to me most in the movie is when they select the actress, they say that she could even give a dog a hard on.
yeah.
Which, you know, is just
a hell of a line.
It says everything about these people. But no, I agree with your interpretation. I feel like the ending is very much saying that Gilderoy is now, like, he's very much become a cog in the machine. He is completely complicit in the environment and the mistreatment of these women, much like is how it's happening in the movie. His, like, violent fantasies about stabbing that woman, I feel like that's just, he's so affected by this. That's how he views what he's done to her. Like, he's been complicit in her leaving the project. He feels like he's killed her.
Yeah.
You know.
I think it speaks to his own cowardice, I think, is what's also kind of tearing him apart, because it is a point that is made by the actress who leaves, who kind of says, like, look, if you want to get anything done around here, you kind of have to shake your fist and have a go at people. But Gilderoy is just incapable of doing that. And I think, as well, there's that kind of I mean, they kind of point this out a number of times, but there's kind of a joking reference to it where Santini kind of says, oh, you English, you know, you're always hiding, how can I get to know you, you know. But then that's the funny thing about that, is that Francesco completely wants Gilderoy to not express himself, you know, because whenever Gilderoy says anything that Francesco doesn't like, he's always with the, oh, you know, in my country we don't start a conversation like that. We start with the positive, you know, or it's like, oh, in my country it seems impolite to criticize this, that, and the other, you know, and it's total fucking bullshit. As anyone who's met an Italian person knows, they have no problem with, you know, speaking their mind. If anything, all that shtick about, you know, you're supposed to be positive, you're not supposed to complain too much, to me that speaks more to a British mindset than it does an Italian mindset, in my experience. But
there's and I think, like, you know, going back to this idea that there's, like, parallels between the film, the Equestrian Vortex, and, like, what's going on with Gilderoy. There's little parts, like, the whole thing where Francesco gives him is it Francesco or Santini? I can't remember which one it is, but gives him a grape. And he said that he eats the grape.
Santini, yeah.
Santini gives him the grape, and Gilderoy goes to spit the seeds out, and Santini says, no, where I come from, we swallow the seeds. But the way that scene's shot, it feels very much like a sort of satanic rite or something.
Yes.
There's something very ritualistic about it.
Yes.
Like, and it's shot in a very intimate way as well.
And he says after that, when he does swallow the seeds, he has a line, doesn't he, about you say, oh, you're becoming Italian now, or something like that, or you're becoming one of us.
Yeah, he's becoming one of us. And I also kind of feel like, and I'd like to maybe go back to the movie again, see if there's any further development to this. But you know how there's the guy that comes in to do the voice acting as the Goblin?
Yes.
I feel like maybe on some level that's Gilderoy. In, you know, if you're kind of equating the context of the story of the movie to what's going on, because they mentioned that, you know, the Goblin moves amongst the girls aroused, but not really doing anything. And obviously that's kind of what Gilderoy's doing, isn't it? Like, he's surrounded by women he's clearly infatuated with.
That's a good pull.
Doesn't know how to do anything. Or like he doesn't want to do anything.
Because they do also, they quite subtly show that he is lusting after these women, because you see him very pointedly staring at the secretary's rear end, for one thing. And
he also sort of endlessly pores over the recordings of the actresses as well. Even in his spare time, he's shown listening to them.
Yeah, so he's clearly becoming fixed. And we know that he doesn't have a partner at home, or as far as we know, he doesn't. His only correspondent is his mother.
Who, from what we see, he never actually writes back to. She writes to him, but we never see that he responds, and like her letters get more sort of panicked, I guess, as the movie goes on. She goes from saying, "Oh, you know, hope the food over there's okay," to, "Oh, like a fox killed all these chickens. There's blood everywhere."
Well, yeah, because she talks about these birds nesting in his shed, which we understand as his tinkering shed, basically, where he does his sound effects at home. And yeah, the first letter kind of mentions them. Oh, it'd be lovely if you're back in time to see them hatch, and then they do hatch. And then they'll get brutally killed.
So obviously it speaks to how long Gilderoy's there as well. If these eggs, are, like if the chicks hatch, and like I think she mentions that they're kind of growing as well. So it shows how long he's been there, because that would imply he's been there for what, a couple of weeks, maybe.
Yeah, and they get brutally killed as well, which I'm not sure what that symbolism is about really. Whether it's just supposed to be unnerving.
Maybe if Gilderoy was there, they wouldn't have been, because he would have been in his shed.
Maybe. So maybe it goes back to the complicity.
Yeah, like, you know, if he was there, that probably may not have happened. And, you know, and in this regard, you know, he's allowed these actresses to be, like, mistreated and abused and stuff. But yeah, like, there's a lot similar to Knife Plus Heart. I feel like, you know, when you kind of peel away the layers, there's a lot more going on. Like, this film, much like Knife Plus Heart, uses the sort of aesthetics and the presentation of a Giallo movie to kind of tell a slightly more different story. And again, both films about making films as well, which is interesting that considering these films are both harking back to a specific genre of movie, it's interesting they've kind of gone for a slightly more meta route with it, as opposed to being outright just these are just Giallo films.
Yeah, it's interesting. I definitely want to see both of these films again. They both definitely affected me on a personal level. I think I kind of want to, with Knife Plus Heart, I kind of just want to see it again, kind of knowing where it's going and seeing what that experience is like. With Berberian Sound Studio, I kind of want to see, I feel like there's layers that I've not picked up on a first viewing. And that's always an exciting thing to know about a film, because it means you're going to watch it again. Which I definitely am. Yeah.
Yeah, I would watch both of these films again, absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot about Berberian Sound Studio. I often say, as you know, Mark, I'm not a huge fan of David Lynch, which I think would be a kind of touchstone for this movie outside of Giallo.
Yeah, there's definitely Lynchian elements. I can definitely see a lot of stuff like a Razorhead. I think I can definitely see in there.
Because I often feel Lynch and filmmakers inspired by Lynch tend to, and I'm not saying this is all Lynch ever does, there are films of his that I like, but there are a lot of his films where I kind of feel like, okay, so do you just forget how to tell a story then, David? By the end of it, just kind of go, I mean, the symbolism was lovely, but I don't think there was much going on other than it was weird and freaky. And, you know, if that's what tickles your pickle, then, you know, who am I to judge? But I will say, what I kind of would say about something like Berberian Sound Studio that differentiates it from those films of Lynch that do frustrate me is that I think there is stuff being said. As much as Strickland would say he's not a didactic filmmaker, I think there is morality behind what's happening. I think even though the events of the film are open to interpretation, I think there are, you know, philosophical and moral ideas being discussed. And I think
I think he's definitely saying something about those films in general. Like, you know, he's speaking about the way in which they were made. He's speaking about like their attitudes towards, like, you know, female attitudes towards women, and, you know, I think it is kind of looking at maybe how, like, you know, damaging to one's psyche these sort of things could be, how shocking these things could be. I think, you know, he is talking about these things, he's just not explicitly doing so, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's all there in a kind of symbolism soup for you to interpret, which is how I like it. It's how I like it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to grasp on, and there's enough for you to be able to draw your own conclusions, and I really quite like that sort of thing. I'd definitely say of the two films, I think Berberian Sound Studio perhaps is a little more sort of streamlined in that sense. I feel like it's a lot easier to sort of draw conclusions as to what's actually going on in it, whereas I feel like Knife Plus Heart is a little bit more sprawling, and it's kind of there's multiple things going on in that movie, and it's trying to say a lot about very different ideas. But I think both of these movies, especially because we talked about quite earlier in the podcast, we've been talking quite a while, we talked about how, like, Giallo can be a little bit impenetrable to a lot of people. I think these two films are would be good for people who aren't particularly well versed in the genre as sort of entry points, because even though they're sort of paying homage to these sort of movies, I don't think you need to have been particularly I don't think you need to be well versed to appreciate these films for what they are and what they're kind of going for. But I feel like if you like these movies, you could easily go back and check out older movies and really sort of, I feel like they'd be a good entry point for a lot of people.
Yeah, it almost has that kind of this is a very odd pull for a comparison, but bear with me. It kind of has that Edgar Wright thing where there are references to and call-outs to various Giallo films in both of these pieces, some of which I'm sure went over even our heads. But
yeah, absolutely.
But I think what I mean when I compare it to Edgar Wright is like he will have reference after reference after reference throughout his movies to movies of similar genres. But the movies work as their own pieces, even if you don't get the references. It's just if you then... so, for example, if you've seen Hot Fuzz, you don't need to have seen like Bad Boys 2, for example, to get why certain things are funny. But if you have seen Bad Boys 2, that adds another layer to it. Or if you have seen The Wicker Man in that movie as well, there's certain layers to it that you can then go, oh, he's kind of doing a riff on that. But if you don't know that, the film still works. And I think it takes a certain precision from a filmmaker to be able to pull that off and not just feel like
I'd agree,
you're doing references for the sake of doing references.
Yeah, which obviously we won't get too into it because you were quite near in the end, but like I feel like that's probably one of Tarantino's biggest weaknesses is that I feel like some of it, particularly in his dialogue, I think a lot of it is a lot more contingent on the audience actually knowing what he's referencing and what he's talking about, as opposed to like what Edgar Wright or Peter Strickland do, where those references are there but it's not intrinsic to the story for you to know.
There's no point where anyone's sitting anyone down and going, have you ever seen a fucking Dario Argento movie?
Yeah, literally. And again, same goes to Knife Plus Heart as well. I feel like I feel like even in that as well, like you could still infer some of the influences that weren't even strictly Giallo movies. Like you could see elements of something like Halloween in Knife Plus Heart, like particularly in the way like the killer is framed and stuff. Like you would easily identify a lot of that sort of cinematic language from American cinema as opposed to just Italian cinema. And same with Berberian Sound Studio. I think there's something very thoroughly British about the movie as well, in terms of its presentation.
Yeah. One thing I did want to say before we do start wrapping up, something that would have been an interesting comparison piece with Berberian Sound Studio actually, but it's definitely a film that I will be picking at some point in the future. Have you seen or heard of a movie called The Vast of Night?
No, but that's a great title.
Yeah. So the reason it kind of this is something I've watched recently, back when I was on Fairly.
Back in the good old
days. It's on Amazon, so it's easily accessible. It's kind of an indie picture debut director, but it really stuck with me, and it has a similar effect to. It's not quite as abstract as Berberian Sound Studio, but essentially it's kind of an alien invasion movie, but you don't really see the aliens or the invading, and like it's kind of presented as if it's an episode of a Twilight Zone style show, and then it goes into the movie. So it's set in the. It's set in the 60s and might be the 50s. I'd have to double check that. But basically, it follows this kid who's a young man who's a radio host, and a kind of teenage girl who's a switchboard operator, and they end up picking up this weird audio, and that kind of leads them down this rabbit hole where they end up kind of. And like the entire movie is about like these people who've had these weird UFO experiences, and like one woman's kid even got abducted, and like one guy's this dude who was in the military and he saw this stuff. And the reason I would compare it to Berberian Sound Studio is that it's doing a lot by just evoking things. Like the thing that's so striking about The Vast of Night is it is a tell don't show movie, but it completely works, and it evokes that quality of uneasiness where because you're not just being shown a thing. You're not just being shown a three-eyed monster and going, oh, well, it's an alien. Because you're being left to imagine what this thing could look like and what it would feel like to be looking at it. You have this extra sensory awareness almost as you're watching the movie. And I think both of them achieve it, why I think the comparison is relevant. Both of them achieve it by evoking a specific era of cinema as well, and of media, of television. So in the case of Berberian Sound Studio, I keep wanting to say Berberian Sound System, which sounds like a German rave band.
Are you thinking of LCD Sound
Yeah,
System?
maybe, yeah.
But
yeah. So in the case of Berberian Sound Studio, it's evoking Giallo without showing it in a way that kind of unsettles you and kind of gives you this impression of violent imagery and this kind of almost occult-like imagery. And whereas in The Vast of Night, it's kind of evoking the Twilight Zone and kind of 50s, 60s sci-fi, so that you kind of have this image in your head that you're not being shown, but you're kind of going like, do you know what I mean? It's kind of playing almost this it's kind of almost playing with your subconscious, because you have this kind of repertoire of pop culture imagery that's just sort of nestling away in your mind's eye.
It's exactly what I was saying about Berberian Sound Studio, where it's so good at implanting it basically forces images into your head. And and I think that's probably the reason why, in the terms of the movie, that's one of the reasons why Gilderoy, his sanity starts to slip so much, because not only is he witnessing the imagery and creating the sounds, when he's like chopping into stuff, he's like completely complicit in the violence of it. Like, his work is what makes that imagery so much more powerful. And the fact that we never even see it, like, even as, I genuinely think the sound design in Berberian Sound Studio is like stomach churning. The sound design is so good that it makes just like there's loads of like static shots of just rotting marrow on the floor that's been smashed, and just that, like, the sound design makes the image of rotting vegetables genuinely uncomfortable. And I love the movie for that reason. And I think it's just so good at just forcing imagery into your head, and because especially the acts that are described. I mean, as somebody who's so well versed in, like Giallo and stuff, but like I can kind of imagine if we were shown like what I can imagine how that would be presented in that style. But it's just the sounds are just so horrific. And I'd recommend anybody check it out.
Well, I think we've kind of tipped our hand here, but we'll go with our customary rating system at the end. Mark, did you think Knife Plus Heart was Kino, or is it going straight in the fucking Inferno?
I'm gonna give it the same rating I'm gonna give Berberian Sound Studio. So can I do your 2-in-1?
Yeah, do it.
Cool. They're both Kino, but Kino with caveats. And just in that, I think they're both Kino, and I think they're both definitely films that I would recommend. But like, they 100% are not for everybody. I know you can say that about any movie.
Not you couldn't say that about Garfield: A Tale of Two Kitties. That is entertainment for mum, dad, gran, and the kids.
I love how that was where your brain went when you're thinking of like what's like the most middle of the road. What's like the Randy Newman of cinema? What's the most inoffensive thing? And you went for Garfield: A Tale of Two Kitties, the worst film in Bill Murray's filmography.
That is a bold claim.
Okay, what film in Bill Murray's filmography is worse?
All right, I mean, we're supposed to be doing Kino versus Inferno, but we'll add some runtime onto this episode just to do that. Bill Murray. Listeners, you're hearing me Google Bill Murray in real time. Not Google.
Right, okay, right. Whilst you Google that and try and come up with an answer to what I've just posed as an impossible question, because I've already answered the question for you, I'll just continue on with what I'm saying.
Can I just throw one out there that I've not seen but sounds awful?
Go on then.
Tarzoon, Shame of the Jungle, which is apparently a 1975 French-Belgian adult animated comedy film, which Bill Murray
Don't believe it's worse than Garfield: A Tale of Two Kitties. I
well,
really don't.
I guess that'll be an episode in the future.
Cool, right, there you go, guys. We'll do that again. Garfield: A Tale of Two Kitties, and what's it, Tarzoon? Is that what we're doing?
Tarzoon, The Shame of the Jungle.
Right, there you go, guys. That's an episode in the future. So if you've stuck it out this long and you've heard this, then we're doing that. I'll hold him to that because he's insisted on it now. Anyway, back to my point before you so awfully derailed me with Garfield: A Tale of Two Kitties.
There is Hamlet 2000.
What? That's a thing?
Yeah, mate, it's got Ethan Hawke as Hamlet and Kyle MacLachlan's in it. It's not very good.
Why have I not seen this? This sounds magical.
I don't know. I guess it's going to be a triple bill this episode. Anyway, just say the thing you were about to say before we went.
Anyway, yeah. Before you distracted me with Garfield, as you so often do. So definite Kino. Would absolutely recommend both of these movies, but yeah, they're certainly for a specific audience. I would say. I think, especially like because they're both horror films, but they're not like your standard horror films. I think maybe Knife Plus Heart might be a little bit too provocative for people, for some people. And I think the kind of the more sort of open-endedness and the looseness and the sort of more dreamlike qualities may leave people a little bit baffled, and those who aren't as well, versed in Giallo may find some of it a little bit bizarre, particularly, Bird Hand Man. Like, even as a fan of the genre, I found that a bit jarring. And same with Berberian Sound Studio. I think, it's, for my money, it's a fantastic horror film because it was effective and actually kind of like me, it made my skin crawl a few times and like really kind of got to me on like an emotional level. But I know for a fact that won't work for everybody. So certified Kino, but with a caveat. That's what I'm going with.
I'm just going to go certified Kino. Don't be a coward. Watch the films.
So not only are you busted out Garfield and derailed me, you're just going to go binary on it. Okay, fair enough.
Look,
that's fine.
Look. My thoughts are as follows. If you're a horror fan who's interested in more experimental horror films or slightly off the beaten track horror films, if that is you, watch this movie. If you're just someone who watch both these movies, I should say. If you're just someone who wants to watch something and isn't too fussy, but that sounds like a diss on the movies. What I was going to say is isn't too prudish, then Knife Plus Heart is so fucking good. And like, look, just because Knife Plus Heart is a movie you could just watch with your buddies.
I think it's got enough like appeal in that sense. Like it's smutty enough, it's violent enough, and it's got enough of the good stuff. But if you are wanting something that is a little bit more serious, and you want to kind of deep dive into something like that, it's got that as well. But it's the sheer amount of like homoeroticism in it, should I say? I can't even get my fucking words out. It's getting late. It's definitely not going to be for everybody. It's going to put a few people off.
But I think both these movies are certified Kino. Like, if you're in any way interested in pursuing films that are a little bit off the beaten track, then check them both out.
Exactly. Like,
no messing.
Like, they both got a lot of artistic merit, and they're both, in their own ways have got some kind of abstract nature to them. But like, they're not so abstract that you're going to struggle to keep up with what's going on in it. I think if you're wanting to sort of dip your toe into some of the more sort of fringes of horror, these are two very good places to start.
And if you watch Knife Plus Heart and you want to watch Berberian Sound Studio, but you need a little palate cleanser, stick Garfield Tale of Two Kitties on, have that in the middle with a cup of tea, and then get into Berberian Sound Studio.
Do you know what? I think, all right. Certified Kino. Garfield 2's coming, apparently.
So anyway, we're not doing Garfield 2 next, though. We're both clearly getting bored. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. There'll probably be social media stuff in the drop down. It's fine. The show's called Kino Inferno. Just Google Kino Inferno. You'll find what you need to find.
Do the work yourselves.
Do some bloody work.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always good to end a podcast with having a little Barney with the listeners.
Right. Well, if you've stuck it out with us this long, thank you so much for listening.
I mean, it's not going to be as long. Mark, I hate to break it to you, it's not going to be as long because I'm going to edit it.
No, but we are currently 2.5 hours.
Yeah. At least half of that is going.
Right. I'll at least do a sign off at least.
Okay.
So, thank you for sticking us... never mind, I'm going to go again.
Sorry,
it's late, leave me alone. Okay. So, thank you for sticking with us for this long, and we hope that you're going to join us next time, where we're going to be discussing 2 Disney films that we feel have been sort of unfairly overlooked, but also perhaps suffered a little bit at the hands of Disney. So, we're going to be talking about Hocus Pocus and Treasure Planet.
Yeah, peace out, fuckers.